Everyone knows cats and dogs hate each other, but when this little kitten fell straight into the den of the Tyrant Canine clan, not only did she not get logged out of life, she even made that notorious pack of hunting dogs throw away all their dignity. Arch enemies? Sorry. Around here, we only have a bunch of simps competing to pamper the boss. Who would have thought that just to get her mother's approval, Hong Xue willingly agreed to this absurd request? Her mother scoffed and asked her point blank, "You haven't even mastered internal energy, so how are you going to help me achieve my wish?" Hong Xue nodded firmly, vowing that as long as it helped her mother, she would do anything. Who knew her biological mother would give her a life-threatening task right off the bat, forcing her to go all the way to the lake at the peak of Mount Daju to find some lord of the lake. Only when she brought back his inner core would her mother accept her into the clan. The more decisive she had been when she accepted, the more she regretted it now. This time, Hong Xue was utterly screwed over by her own mother. This Mount Daju is no place for humans. With snow flying everywhere, even finding a place to stand is hard. She muttered as she walked, "Mom probably forgot to mention that I could freeze to death on this mountain, but now there's no turning back." So she has to grit her teeth and keep climbing. Seeing that she can't hold on much longer, Hong Xue resorts to her ultimate move. She transforms into a tiny kitten. She thought changing her form would make things easier, but who knew the blizzard on the mountain would be so intense? Even a thick coat of cat fur couldn't handle it. This time, her clever plan totally backfired. She sighed. If only I had mastered internal energy, this slope would take just one jump to clear. But no, now is not the time to give up. She absolutely cannot disappoint her mother. Hong Xue wags her tail, psychs herself up, and continues to drag her tiny paws toward the peak. After a grueling and painful struggle, Hong Xue finally manages to crawl to her destination. The vast lake before her is even more magnificent than she had imagined. It seems her mother didn't lie to her. In the middle of this cold, desolate, and treacherous forest, such a place was actually hidden. She transforms back into human form and breathes a huge sigh of relief. All the suffering along the way wasn't in vain after all. Next, she just has to do exactly what her mother said. Find a big rock and throw it into the lake. Hongyu walks along the shore, searching back and forth, and finally spots a perfect, massive rock. She intends to throw it in to summon that lord of the lake, but the naive girl has no idea whether throwing this rock will bring good fortune or a total disaster. The moment the rock sinks, Hongju realizes she has caused a massive blunder. A cold voice echoes like an explosion in her mind, roaring to see who dared to be brave enough to throw a rock at him. Before she can even process it, the lake's surface suddenly boils violently. That voice has clearly lost patience, intending to teach this uninvited guest a lesson. Right after that, a giant white shadow tears through the water and leaps up, blocking out over half the sky. Hong Xue is frozen in fear. What kind of lord of the lake is this? This is clearly a terrifyingly massive white serpent. Standing before this monstrous creature, her tiny body wouldn't even be enough to pick its teeth. The white serpent leans down and glares at Hong Xue, his tone full of disdain. In his eyes, this brat who dared to throw a rock isn't even as big as one of his scales. Hong Hui is so terrified that she stammers, but right at that moment, she remembers her mother's words. As long as she gets the inner core, she will be just like the other children, held in her mother's arms and fed sweets. Just to win her mother's approval, and to reclaim a bit of her dignity, she risks it all. She digs her hands deep into the snow on the ground, grits her teeth, looks up, and asks the giant creature in front of her if he is the master of this lake. This question makes the white serpent pause for a second. Even in his wildest dreams, he never expected this tiny creature, who isn't even big enough to fit between his teeth, would actually dare to open her mouth. The white serpent smirks, admitting that he is indeed the master of this place. He thought that revealing his identity would scare this brat into fainting on the spot. Who could have guessed that Hong Xue's next words would almost make him fall backward? She takes a deep breath, strains her neck, and yells at the top of her lungs, telling the white serpent to hand over his inner core. Talk about having massive balls. The inner core is the essence of a spiritual beast's cultivation over countless years. Calling it their very life wouldn't be an exaggeration. Yet this girl opens her mouth and just demands it. Now it's the white serpent's turn to be stunned. Having lived for so long, this is the first time he's ever seen someone dare to rob him to his face. The entire space instantly falls dead silent. The white serpent even thinks his ears are playing tricks on him. He laughs out of pure anger. Demanding his inner core is no different from demanding his life. Suspecting this child is being used by someone malicious, he tries to hold back his temper and explain what an inner core actually is, but Hongshui completely refuses to listen. The little girl just keeps bowing and begging, saying that as long as she gets the inner core, she'll leave immediately. It's a total breakdown in communication, giving the white serpent a massive headache. Finally, unable to hold it in any longer, he lets out a roar, flatly rejecting this stubborn brat. Right at that moment, an old man carrying a large gourd on his back slowly walked over, saying the mountain was too noisy, so he intentionally stopped by to see what was going on. Looking at the old man's aura, he seemed to be a hidden master. Hongyu stared blankly at the old man, feeling anxious in her heart that maybe he had also come to snatch the inner core. But when she clearly saw the cloud pattern on the old man's clothes, her entire body suddenly froze. That was the family, crest of the Nam Gong clan, the sworn enemies of her Miao family. Originally, the Miao family was a noble cat beastman clan, but the Nam Gong clan was like a pack of hungry wolves, always crazily suppressing and tormenting them, even causing her entire clan to completely fall into ruin. Hongjue recalled the words the adults used to say. Those bastards from Nam Gong not only destroyed their homeland, but also ruthlessly slaughtered the warriors of their clan. In Hongjue's eyes, the Nam Gong clan was no different from a demon's den full of fierce canine beastmen. A tiny cat beastman like her falling into their hands would only end up as a snack. The old man stared at her, asking why she wanted to take the white serpent's inner core. This question scared Hongshui out of her wits, so she didn't dare tell the truth, fearing the other party would think she came to rob the treasure and just casually swallow her whole. Seeing that she couldn't escape, Hongshui desperately took a gamble and transformed straight back into her original form as a white cat, tucking her tail and running for her life across the snow. With that, her cover was completely blown. The old man, with just one glance, recognized right away that this was a descendant of the Miao family. The old man yelled in a panic from behind, telling Hongshui to stop quickly. But how could the panicking white cat dare to look back? She just ran blindly for her life without realizing at all that the snowy path ahead had hit a dead end. Before the old man's warning could even finish, Hongshui took a misstep, and before she could process what was happening, her tiny body lost its balance, falling freely into the deep, endless abyss. This time she was truly done for. Falling from such a height, her little life couldn't be saved. I'm sorry, Mom. The first mission you gave me, that inner core, in the end, I couldn't bring it back. Hongjue was in sheer agony all over her body and couldn't move. Was she really going to die, miserably in a deserted corner like this? Right at that moment, a sound suddenly came from above. Someone had chased after her. Nam Gong Hao rushed over in a hurry, calling out loudly to Duong Nievu, telling him to save her quickly. Who would have thought that after checking, Duong Nievu just shook his head and said, "She's beyond saving." Nam Gong Hao asked in a panic, "Why is she beyond saving?" Duong Nievu sighed. This child's meridians are all completely shattered. Even if a great deity descended to Earth, they couldn't reconnect them. You should know that. Meridians are the very source of a beastman's life. Having shattered meridians meant this life was as good as gone. Looking at the dying Hongshui, Nam Gong Hao suddenly realized she was the eldest young miss who was known as the most famous useless trash of the Miao clan. So right from the start, they wanted me to die, Hongshui thought to herself. No wonder Mom didn't give me a single word of advice and just pushed me onto this snow-covered Mount Daju to face that terrifying, giant white serpent. She originally had absolutely no intention of letting a useless thing like me return alive. Nam Gong Hao looked at the little cat in his arms and couldn't help but feel heartbroken. How much suffering has this tiny body of yours actually had to bear? He gently comforted her. Go to sleep, child. Everything is fine now. This feeling was as if she had finally found a safe harbor. His embrace was truly warm. It seemed like she was about to go to a better place. Beside Hongsu's ears, a lullaby suddenly started to echo, the song her mother used to sing to her when she was little. Is Mom coming to pick me up? Is it because I'm dead that she's finally willing to come see me? Before she could figure it out, a sharp pain suddenly came from her wrist, and a strange mark unexpectedly lit up. The surge of power grew hotter and hotter, as if it wanted to burn her entire arm to ashes. But in the next second, the surrounding temperature abruptly dropped to freezing point, and a cold voice rang out right above her head. Don't just stand there dazed. I asked you, do you even know what an inner core actually is? Hongshu snapped back to reality with a jolt. She looked at the giant serpent in front of her, staring intently at her. What the hell was going on? She clearly remembered falling off the cliff, so why did she suddenly return to the lakeside? Moreover, there wasn't a single scratch on her body. Right at that moment, Nam Gong Hao, carrying a basket, slowly walked over. He chuckled and said that since the mountain was so noisy just now, it turned out there was some drama to enjoy here. Hong Shui was completely stupefied. Could she really have turned back time to the exact moment before her death? Even though it sounded like fiction, the truth was she had been revived. However, before she could rejoice for long, Nam Gong Hao spoke up coldly. Why do you want to steal the white serpent's inner core? Hong Shui pondered. She still hadn't thought of a way to answer this question. She recalled what Nam Gong Hao once said. This was the eldest young miss born a useless trash of the Miao family, who couldn't even use internal energy. Their goal was clear. Since she was a useless piece of trash, they just pushed her out here to die. Hongji remained silent because deep down, she understood very well that she truly had nowhere left to go. Right at that moment, Nam Gong Hao frowned and asked the giant serpent, Duong Niavu, what are you doing bullying a child out here? Who could have guessed that this ordinary-looking old man was actually the legendary Sword King, the absolute strongest powerhouse of the Nam Gong clan? Nam Gong Hao sighed and said, I came to find you for a drink. Duong Nievu suddenly remembered something. Today was Lady Wei's death anniversary. Nam Gong Hao turned to ask Hong Shui one last time. Little girl, have you thought it through? He pressed her in a stern voice. Who on earth instigated you to come here and steal the inner core? Hong Yu lowered her head, stammering out 2 words. My mother, she said bashfully. Mom said as long as I bring back the inner core, she will allow me to call her mother. So all of this is my fault. Hearing this, even the giant serpent Duong Nievu standing nearby found it hard to swallow. What kind of mother is that cruel, clearly pushing her own biological daughter to her death? Nam Gong Hao pondered for a moment, his tone softening up a bit, asking where her home was. Hong Shui's mind was a chaotic mess. She didn't dare reveal her identity as a cat beastman, but recalling the moment this old man put a warm coat on her before she died, she felt this might be her only way to survive. Hong Shui was extremely anxious. No matter how kind this old man seemed, she feared he would never want to bring a child of the Miao family back to the Nam Gong household. Seeing her hesitate for so long without speaking, Nam Gong Hao began to lose patience and shouted loudly, I'm asking you! Hong Yu jumped in fright, and her animal ears and tail, which had been carefully hidden, suddenly popped out all at once. Nam Gong Hao, with just one glance, recognized her background immediately. This child came from the renowned Miao family in the region. Rumor had it they had a daughter who couldn't cultivate internal energy at all. It must be this child. Looking at the tiny fluff ball cowering in the middle of the snow, Nam Gong Hao also found it difficult. Those people from the Miao family were truly cruel enough to throw a little child out into this godforsaken deadly place. If he left the little girl here, she would definitely freeze to death. Hongju lowered her head and replied in a voice as tiny as a mosquito's buzz. It's true that my mother brought me here. She whimpered and begged, Lord Nam Gong, please take me with you. I have no home to go back to anymore. Looking at this helpless child, the instructions left by Lady Wei when she was alive suddenly flashed through Nam Gong Hao's mind. She had once said, if you encounter weak, pitiful children in the future, please be sure to treat them gently on my behalf. Nam Gong Hao sighed in his heart. Perhaps this child is the fate she sent to me. He remained silent for a moment and then spoke. What is your name? Hong Sui mumbled back. My name is Hong Shui. Nam Gong Hao nodded thoughtfully. Your mother is indeed a heartless woman. Right after that, he made a decision that shocked even the white serpent, Duong Nievu. Nam Gong Hao slowly extended his hand and said in a gentle voice, Come home with me. Duong Nievu, standing nearby, bristled like a porcupine upon hearing this, warning him loudly, Are you crazy? How dare you bring a cat beastman back to the Nam Gong residence? Everyone will object to it. Just watch. Hongju looked at that large, warm hand, her heart flooding with warmth. She felt that this old man was truly an incredibly good person. Right when she gathered all her courage to reach out and respond, an unexpected crisis struck. Hongwu's legs suddenly went weak, and her whole body collapsed onto the snow. Nam Gong Hao's expression shifted drastically as he rushed forward in a hurry to catch her. No one expected Hong Sui to faint at this exact moment. Nam Gong Hao cried out in a panic, driving Duong Ningyavu beside him absolutely crazy. He ran over while scolding, saying that those threats just now from Nam Gong Hao had scared this poor child half to death, telling him to shut his mouth so he could check her pulse. But the moment Nam Gong Hao touched her pulse, his whole body stiffened. Duong Nyevu transformed back into human form and asked, Is the situation that bad? Nam Gong Hao replied with a grim face. The meridians inside this child's body are tangled into a complete mess. This is fundamentally not a typical internal energy backlash, but looks exactly like a mountain path washed away by a landslide. Her acupoints are completely blocked, and everywhere is filled with nothing but impurity. Just what kind of terrifying secret was this child's body hiding? Nam Gong Hao took action himself, wanting to see what on earth was wrong with her. Who could have guessed that upon checking, even he would be shocked? He discovered that two opposing forces of yin and yang actually coexisted within Hong Sue's body. Duang Yevu stood by, feeling anxious as he listened. How is this even possible? Nam Gong Hao sighed. This child suffers from the yin-yang severed meridians condition, meaning her meridians are congenitally blocked completely, making it impossible to channel qi. In the eyes of everyone, this is an incurable disease, and completely incurable. People with this constitution are usually sickly from childhood and don't survive past adulthood, let alone practice martial arts. Looking at the comatose child, Duang Nievu couldn't help but sigh that heaven was truly too cruel. I'm afraid this little one could lose her life at any moment. Nam Gong Hao remained silent for a moment, then suddenly asked a question that no one dared to think of. What if we can cure these severed meridians? Duang Nievu was left speechless. Nam Gong Hao continued, if we cure her, she will be the perfect genius to cultivate the yin-yang divine art. That is the ultimate legendary martial art, capable of controlling both forces of yin and yang simultaneously. Having the Nam Gong clan produce a master of the yin-yang divine art is the biggest dream of my life. Duang Nievu felt he was just daydreaming. The cure for the severed meridians condition had long been lost. Where are you going to find someone to save her life now? Nam Gong Hao firmly uttered a name. Yuhua can cure it. Hearing this, Duang Nievu burst out laughing. You're flexing your own daughter-in-law way too much. Nam Gong Hao seriously countered. This isn't favoritism. Yuhua is the master of the Nam Gong Medical Clinic. No one dares to doubt her medical skills. At this point, Duang Nievu finally realized Nam Gong Hao was dead serious. But the problem was, Yuhua wasn't home right now. Could this child even hold out until she returned? Duang Nievu couldn't help but remind him about those stubborn elders in the clan. Every single one of them only values bloodline. They will absolutely never accept an outsider, let alone a child who has a pair of animal ears. In the eyes of those people, this is a complete freak. Nam Gong Hao looked at Hong Shu in his arms, remained silent for a very long time, and then spoke. We'll deal with the identity issue later. Right now, we must think of every possible way to keep her alive until Yuhua gets back. After saying that, he suddenly turned around and glared at Duang Nievu, his tone becoming extremely firm. Hand that thing over. Duang Nievu was stunned. He instantly realized the item Nam Gong Hao was targeting was none other than the treasure of Mount Daju. That was the true life-saving divine object. Nam Gong Hao was truly going all in this time. He nodded to confirm. That's right, the thing I need is exactly that treasure. Duang Nievu cursed out loud in anger. Have you gone senile? How dare you open your mouth to demand such a priceless treasure? Nam Gong Hao refused to back down even a single step. Precisely because it is a precious treasure. It is worthy of saving this child's life. Neither of the two would give in to the other, instantly throwing hands to snatch it. On the training grounds of the Nam Gong clan, the disciples were shouting slogans and practicing hard. Not until the instructor yelled loudly to signal a break did everyone stop their hands and prepare to go eat dinner. Nam Gong Hao carried Hong Sui as he walked across the courtyard. The disciples passing by hurriedly bowed their heads to salute him, while he only gave a casual grunt, having no intention of stopping his steps. But once he walked out of sight, the disciples behind his back immediately began to whisper. Someone asked curiously, what is grandfather holding in his arms? Why does it look like a supergiant roasted sweet potato? Right at that moment, a young boy's voice rang out. Grandfather, you're finally back! This was Nam Gong Hao's youngest grandson, Nam Gong Jie. The moment he saw his grandfather, the young boy happily rushed over, saying he had been waiting for a very long time just to ask about the inner core. Nam Gong Hao was slightly taken aback, clearly not expecting this boy to be so interested in that kind of stuff. Seeing Nam Gong Ji keep pressing for information about the inner core, Nam Gong Hao then felt a bit guilty, realizing the excuse he had casually made up earlier had been taken completely seriously by this kid. While he was feeling awkward, the second grandson, Nam Gong Xia, suddenly lunged out and delivered a sharp smack to his younger brother's head, telling him to mind his manners a bit and not annoy grandfather here. Nam Gong Xia put on a stern face to lecture his little brother. We are an orthodox righteous sect. You absolutely must not talk nonsense like this in the future. Nam. Gong Hao looked at this second grandson and couldn't help but chuckle, teasingly. As expected of a 9-year-old big boy, you sound more and more like a proper older brother. But right after that, Nam Gong Hao's face darkened. He looked around. Why don't I see the eldest grandson today? He muttered with a sigh. Fair enough. After all, today is that day. It's understandable that he wouldn't show up. Looking at his 2 curious grandsons, Nam Gong Hao felt there was no need to hide it from his family, so he casually opened up the cloak he was cradling in his arms. The 2 boys froze, right on the spot. No one expected grandfather to bring back such a cute little girl. And what's more, a pair of animal ears grew on her head. Nam Gong Hao lowered his voice to warn them. This child is a cat beast man I picked up on the road. If you want her to stay safely in this house, you must keep this secret locked away in your hearts. Upon hearing this, Nam Gong Xia showed a look of worry instead. The boy wasn't afraid of the elders in the house objecting, but worried that when this girl woke up, she would be scared half to death by the environment before her eyes. After all, in the martial world, who doesn't know exactly what kind of place the Nam Gong clan is? The Nam Gong household is no place for benevolence, but rather a predatory clan that could chew the bones and swallow cats alive. Anyone here is like a greedy, hungry wolf. Nam Gong Hao looked at Hong Shui, and a hint of anxiety suddenly crossed his mind. If she knew the truth, would she still want to stay in this wolf's den? But what he didn't expect was that this little fluffball clearly knew it was dangerous, yet she had still cried and begged him to take her away earlier. Nam Gong Hao glared at his juniors with a stern face. You brats better not bully her in the future, you hear me? The 2 teenagers shrieked in fear and hurriedly waved their hands, vowing to protect the little girl like a fragile egg. Nam Gong Hao sighed. Now that I've laid it all out for you, from now on, you must remember one thing. Everyone in the Nam Gong family must treat this child with all their heart. While giving orders, Nam Gong Hao casually pulled out a cloth pouch, telling his grandson to quickly take it to the kitchen and fry it up for the brat once she woke up. Nam Gong Xia peeked inside and instantly froze. This was absolutely no ordinary cooking ingredient. It was clearly a priceless exotic treasure. Bringing this level of treasure to make a stir-fry, well, probably only his grandfather could do something this absurd. In Hong Shui's dream, the servants called her young miss with their mouths, but they didn't know how to handle her with any care. They grabbed Hong Shui tightly and dragged her roughly to the servants' quarters. Hong Shui whimpered and begged, saying she only wanted to bring along a few precious items. But the other party wouldn't listen, and with a disgusted look, flipped her bed over with a loud crash. Her so-called treasures scattered all over the floor. In the eyes of the servants, this pile was just worthless junk. But nobody knew that these rags and pebbles she had gathered up in Hong Shu's fantasies had once been splendid jewelry to show off to her sister back in the day, and had also been treasures held in the palms of her parents. Back then, everyone praised her as a genius and the future hope of the entire clan. Who would have thought that in a mere 3 days, she would fall from the peak of the clouds into the deep abyss, becoming a useless piece of trash in the mouths of others? The physician shook his head helplessly. This child's meridians are completely shattered. In a clan that worships martial arts, being unable to practice kung fu meant losing everything. The moment she knew her daughter's body was ruined, not a single trace of pity appeared on the mother's face. Instead, she just dropped a cold remark. Since she can't practice kung fu, this child is as good as trash. She didn't even bother to look a second time, directly ordering the servants to take this useless thing away and lock her in the abandoned house in the backyard. From that day on, Hong Shui seemed to have vanished from this household. She humbly hid in the dark corners, watching her mother give all her love to her older sister, her heart filled with an unspeakable bitterness. Just to be held by her mother once again, Hong Shui was humble to the absolute bone. She rushed forward crying, begging and saying that as long as it made her mother happy, she would do whatever she was told. Hearing this, a bizarre smile crept onto her mother's face. She asked back in a soft voice, "Then regarding mother's wish, are you truly willing to help me fulfill it?" Her mother was still that heartless. She pointed toward the distant Mount Daju range and told Hong Shui to go there and never come back. Hong Shui woke up with a jolt, only now realizing that everything just now was only a nightmare. She remembered very clearly that she had died on the mountain, yet now she was alive in the human world here. Before she could figure out where she was, the room door was pushed open, and a mouth-watering aroma of food rushed. And Hongju blinked to look closely, and her entire body went completely numb. This old lord dressed in magnificent robes in front of her was actually that old man from the Nam Gong family on the mountain. Nam Gong Hao smiled kindly at her, saying he was the one who brought her back here. This time, Hong Shui was truly stunned. It seemed like she had finally hit the jackpot of her life. Looking at the exquisite plate of pastries on the table, Hong Hui's stomach growled loudly without her control. From the moment she climbed the mountain until now, it had been way too long since she had a proper meal. She secretly sized up Nam Gong Hao in front of her, feeling that this old lord looked rather gentle, calculating in her mind. If I ask for a stick of tongue hulu, he'll probably agree, right? Nam Gong Hao saw right through her thoughts and immediately threw out a cold sentence. There's no tongue hulu here. Just this single sentence scared Hong Xiu out of her wits. She hurriedly knelt down on the bed, bowing her head while stammering out frantic apologies. She said she was just too hungry, so she had foolish thoughts, then curled up into a corner, crying and begging the Grand Elder to please not punish her. These pastries must be things prepared for noble people. A low-born status like hers was fundamentally not worthy of touching them. Looking at the utterly terrified little girl in front of him, the smile on Nam Gong Hao's face vanished. He could never have imagined that a plate of pastries could scare this child to such an extent. Seeing Nam Gong Hao remain silent for a long time, Hong Gui was so scared she felt like she was about to ascend to heaven. She lay flat on the bed, not daring to move, thinking to herself that this time she was truly doomed, and would definitely be kicked out of the house. Who would have thought the first thing Nam Gong Hao did, when he opened his mouth, was to hold out the plate of pastries in his hand toward her, saying gently, "All of these delicious treats are for you." Hong Sui listened, completely stupefied. Before she could react, Nam Gong Hao had already snapped around to instruct the servants. "Quickly bring up the lavish feast we prepared." He smacked his lips, saying this little girl was so skinny, she was just skin and bones. She definitely needs to be properly nourished. Looking at the lavish feast that she had never even dreamed of before her eyes, Hong Hui was completely frozen on the spot. This time she had truly struck gold. Right at that moment, a sudden commotion came from outside the door. The Nam Gong siblings were actually arguing over who got to bring the food inside for Hong Shui, making a huge racket right in front of the door. Nam Gong Hao looked at this chaotic scene and sighed helplessly. It seemed that this little girl he just picked up would turn into the family's little darling from now on. The two boys rushed in frantically, carefully carrying a plate in their hands. Nam Gong Hao, standing nearby, hurriedly reminded them, telling them to slow down, or else it would be a disaster if they spilled this treasure. The two children said with gleeful faces that they heard Hong Shui was awake, so they intentionally brought up this fresh out of the kitchen dish. Hong Shui poked her head out to take a look. Oh my goodness, on this plate was actually a 10,000-year-old Polygonum multiflorum. This was the legendary elixir that could bring the dead back to life. Out there in the world, it was a treasure that countless people would willingly crack their heads open and shed syrup to fight for. Yet in the Nam Gong household, it was just used for a stir-fry, like a common everyday dish. She looked at the plate of divine medicine, which was steaming hot, her heart feeling incredibly uneasy. Just how ridiculously generous was the Nam Gong family? Could spirit herbs of this tier be something they usually use as pickled vegetables to eat with rice? While the room was bursting with laughter, no one noticed that on the branch of the ancient tree outside the window, a young boy was sitting perched up high. Borrowing the moonlight, he stared intently into the room, whispering softly, "So this is the child that the Grand Elder brought back?" He withdrew his gaze, his tone exuding a chilling coldness that kept people 1,000 miles away, muttering to himself, "Whatever, none of this has anything to do with me anyway." Leaving behind that single remark, he instantly vanished amidst the shadows of the blossoms. It turned out these two foodie brats were none other than Nam Gong Hao's grandsons. One was named Nam Gong Xia, and the other was Nam Gong Jie. Before Hong Xue could even process things, these two kids began interrogating her like a machine gun, wishing they could dig up 18 generations of her ancestors to get clear answers. This scene was truly more chaotic than a criminal interrogation. At this point, Nam Gong Hao finally couldn't stand looking at it any longer. He roared, "Do you two want her to get indigestion before she even eats?" This roar almost scared the souls right out of his two grandsons. The two who were acting cocky just a moment ago now obediently slipped away. Thanks to grandfather chasing the two troublemakers out, her ears were finally at peace. Looking at this table full of delicacies from land and sea, Hong Jue felt that Nam Gong Hao was truly the #1 good person in the world. Nam Gong Hao smiled and said, "You must be starving, right? Eat as much as you want." Although she nodded and agreed with her mouth, Hong Xue was still trembling with fear inside. What if she ate too much, and they looked at her like a human garbage disposal and kicked her straight out onto the streets? But that plate of pastries was truly too alluring. She stared at it while drooling. Nam Gong Hao suddenly spoke up. So compared to the main course, you prefer eating sweets? This is awkward. Her tiny thought had been seen right through. Hong Xue's entire body stiffened, but she still stubbornly replied that she was just admiring the plate of pastries for a moment. Nam Gong Hao smiled again, picked up a piece of the vegetable, and told her to try this dish out. Hong Xue looked closely. This was absolutely no ordinary vegetable. It was clearly that premium 10,000-year-old Polygonum multiflorum from earlier. This kind of supreme treasure was actually being used as a side dish. Before she could react, Nam Gong Hao had already brought the medicine right to her mouth. Like he was coaxing a toddler, he told her to open her mouth. Hong Xue could only grit her teeth and swallow it down. As a result, the moment she took a bite, she almost ascended to heaven on the spot. This bitterness seeped into the deepest parts of her soul, making her entire tongue go numb. Nam Gong Hao, however, calmly threw a sarcastic remark from the side. Good medicine tastes bitter. It's for your own good. So no matter how bitter it is, you must chew it thoroughly and swallow it down for me. Seeing Hong Xue obediently choke down the extremely bitter piece of medicine, Nam Gong Hao's face beamed with a deeply comforted expression. He patted her head and praised her. Very good. Here is your reward. Holding the sweet pastry in her hand, Hong Xue felt incredibly baffled. It was just swallowing a gulp of medicine. Did he really need to praise her as if she had achieved some monumental feat? But the moment the pastry entered her mouth, the extremely bitter taste from just now was instantly wiped away. A wonderful sweetness melted in her mouth, making her unable to stop herself from taking a few more bites. Right at that moment, Nam Gong Hao suddenly asked with a serious face, "Do you feel any movement inside your body right now?" Hong Xue paused and carefully sensed her condition, only to discover a tingly stream of energy slowly radiating around her navel. Nam Gong Hao's eyes lit up brightly. That's it! That is exactly your Dantian's Qi Ocean. It seems that 10,000-year-old spiritual medicine has already begun to take effect. Nam Gong Hao seriously instructed. The medicinal potency of the 10,000-year-old Polygonum multiflorum is too strong. Your current body can't possibly withstand it. It absolutely must be guided by someone. Since you don't know how to control the energy yet, let me lend you a hand. Close your eyes and sense that stream of qi carefully. With just a gentle tap of Nam Gong Hao's finger, a gentle source of power that instantly channeled into Hong Xue's body. She only felt a tremor throughout her entire being. The places where her meridians were originally blocked, now suddenly cleared up completely. This feeling was incredibly wondrous, as if countless new channels had suddenly opened up inside her body. Following that guidance, that cool and refreshing stream of energy began to spread to every single corner of her body. Hong Xue couldn't believe that this stream of power, instead of blowing her body to pieces, actually made her feel unprecedentedly refreshed. Hong Xue gritted her teeth to hold her ground, thinking to herself that as long as she endured just a little bit more, she would completely master this source of power. But right at that moment, Nam Gong Hao suddenly shouted, "Stop!" He violently pulled his hands back, still harboring lingering fear in his heart. He was afraid that if he had used too much force just now and accidentally damaged the child's foundation, it would be a massive trouble. Hong Xue looked at the stern face of her grandfather, thinking she had done something wrong, and hung her head to murmur an apology, saying she didn't do it on purpose. Who would have guessed that after hearing this, Nam Gong Hao burst out laughing. "You silly child!" What is there to apologize for? Your performance just now was truly mind-blowing. With this level of energy sensitivity, saying you're a genius seen once in a century is no exaggeration. He seriously held Hong Xue's shoulders, his eyes flashing with an unhideable excitement, directly dropping a sentence that would change her entire life. "Good child, are you willing to learn martial arts from me?" Facing this sudden invitation, Hong Xue was completely dazed. She stood frozen like a statue for a long time, not yet recovering her senses, subconsciously blurting out, "Huh?" Nam Gong Hao tried to keep his cool on the outside, but inside a stormy sea was raging. Originally, he only wanted to use the 10,000-year-old elixir to keep this child alive, while repairing her broken meridians along the way. He absolutely didn't expect her to be able to practice any peerless martial arts. But her performance when being guided through the energy just now truly broke all the rules. Not only could she immediately keep up with his guidance, she could even precisely control those violent streams of energy. Talent of this caliber is truly unprecedented. He suddenly recalled the records in ancient books. Legend has it that someone with the yin-yang severed meridians constitution, though born weak and sickly, once their meridians are cleared. They will become a one-in-a-million martial arts prodigy. It looks like those legends are all the real deal. Nam Gong-hao looked at Hong Sue in front of him, his gaze becoming more resolute than ever. A top-tier seed, rarely seen in a century like this, absolutely cannot be handed over to anyone else. He had to personally nurture her. Nam Gong-hao pointed toward the surrounding structures and spoke loudly. Good child, this place is the territory of the Nam Gong clan, and where you're standing right now is the residence of the former family head. Hong Sue gasped, stuttering as she asked, Then Grandpa, could it be that you are... Nam Gong-hao smiled and nodded. That's right, I am indeed the former family head of the Nam Gong clan. After that, he seriously told Hong Sue, Being able to learn martial arts from me is a golden opportunity for you. Hearing this, Hong Yue hurriedly stood up abruptly and respectfully called him her great benefactor. She had always remembered that on Mount Deju, it was this very old gentleman who saved her life. In her heart, Nam Gong-hao was a badass hero who stood tall between heaven and earth. But facing the offer to teach her martial arts, Hong Shui suddenly fell into contemplation. She hung her head, her voice full of disappointment. I accept your kindness, benefactor, but my body inherently cannot generate internal energy. I'm afraid I'll only disappoint you in the end. Looking at the child in front of him, Nam Gong-hao's heart suddenly twinged with pain. Only at this moment did he recall the reason Hong Shui was abandoned by her clan was precisely because she couldn't use energy. His forcing her to learn martial arts just now was indeed a bit too hasty. Hong Shui lowered her face, feeling insecure to the absolute extreme. She said that although she didn't know martial arts, she could help with chores, as long as the Nam Gong family agreed to take her in and let her be a small maidservant. Hearing these words, Nam Gong-hao immediately hardened his face and interrupted. What absolute nonsense are you talking about? You are a distinguished guest I personally invited back. I didn't bring you here to make you do hard labor. Hong Shui couldn't believe her ears, widening her eyes as she asked back. So you mean I can really stay here? Nam Gong-hao bossily replied. My word is law on this matter. In this Nam Gong house, no one dares to utter a single word of complaint. Looking at Hong Shui's cautious demeanor, Nam Gong-hao's tone suddenly became incredibly gentle. He softly apologized to the child. Just now, this old man was getting muddle-headed, and shouldn't have forced you to do things you don't like. Can you forgive grandfather? Hearing the words grandfather, all the bitterness in Hong Shui's heart vanished in an instant. She nodded and said, You are my life-saving benefactor. Of course I forgive you. This call of grandfather made Nam Gong-hao utterly overjoyed. He knew that from this moment onward, this child had truly come home. Hong Shui politely said thank you. Seeing that it was already dark, Nam Gong-hao told her to go rest early. After that, he called over a maidservant in the house, pointed at Hong Sui, and seriously instructed. This is a distinguished guest of Changtian Pavilion. You must bring out the highest level of hospitality. Absolutely no slackness allowed. The maidservant hurriedly accepted the order. But looking at Hong Shui's skinny and weak frame, she was a bit troubled, softly reminding him. Report to Elder if we want to tailor a well-fitting dress for this young lady. It will take at least 3 days at the fastest. Nam Gong-hao only now noticed that Hong Sui was still wearing her ragged clothes. He stroked his beard, thought for a moment, and suddenly spoke up. Then just let the child wear that dress first. The moment these words were spoken, the maidservant was so scared she almost couldn't stand straight. With an unbelievable expression, she double-checked. Did you say that dress? Nam Gong-hao decisively nodded. Even though a stormy sea was raging in her heart, the maidservant didn't dare to ask too much. Hong Hui stood by the side listening, completely lost in a fog, not understanding what kind of background that dress actually had to scare people to such an extent. After saying goodbye to her grandfather, Hong Sui had to follow the maidservant toward the unfamiliar Changtian Pavilion. Just when her hair was standing on end from fear, a warm hand suddenly grabbed her hand. This unexpected goodwill finally helped her breathe a sigh of relief. The maidservant leading the way was named Mai. Lan looks quite gentle on the outside, but just a casual sentence from her makes the atmosphere suddenly take a sharp turn. It turns out, this generation of the Nam Gong clan is entirely grandsons. There isn't a single girl at all. So the question is, the clothes that Hong Shui is about to wear, who on earth were they prepared for? Seeing Mai Lan stammer and not dare to speak, Hong Yue tactfully shuts her mouth. But before she can even process it, the next sentence from Mai Lan almost makes her jump. Out of nowhere, why is she suddenly demanding to serve her in the bath? Although she keeps muttering with her mouth that cats and water are sworn enemies, the moment she actually jumps into the bathtub, this warm bliss immediately makes her obediently surrender. Despite this, she is clearly still not used to this life of being served by someone. Even worrying that spending so much hot water before winter has even arrived might be too wasteful. Looking at her cautious, tiptoeing demeanor, Lan stops her hands and says to her sincerely to stop opening her mouth to talk about bothering or not bothering anymore. From this day on, she is no longer a helpless child with nowhere to lean on, but the most honorable guest of the Nam Gong clan. Lan rubs her down while gently comforting her, saying that a child of her age was originally born to be cherished and pampered. This warmth, lost for so long, makes Hongshui completely drop her guard. She even feels that everyone in the Nam Gong family is an incredibly good person. But right at that moment, Lan stares intently at her arm and suddenly shrieks. It turns out that on that snow-white skin, there are actually 2 bright red, snowflake-shaped birthmarks. Hongshui smiles and explains this is the very origin of her name, but when she lowers her head to look closely, her entire body suddenly freezes. This isn't right. Clearly, there should be 3 birthmarks. Why did one suddenly vanish into thin air? She has had these birthmarks since childhood. Hongshui could absolutely not remember it wrong. Could its disappearance be intimately related to her returning to the past? Before she can think it through thoroughly, Lan has already brought out a row of brand new clothes, telling her to choose at will. This feeling of being surrounded and pampered to the absolute teeth truly feels exactly like a dream. The night grows late, and Lan thoughtfully reminds her that if she needs anything, just call for someone at any time. But when the 4 surroundings truly sink into silence, Hongshui tosses and turns, unable to sleep. The things that happened today are truly too much, a gentle Lan, the mysteriously missing birthmark, along with the clothes of unknown origin. All of it keeps spinning around in her mind, like a lantern carousel. She stares blankly at the ceiling, and no matter how much she rolls around, she can't catch a wink of sleep. Hongshui decisively pushes the window open, intending to go outside to get some fresh air and at the same time take a look at just how grand this Nam Gong household actually is. But before the exclamation can leave her mouth, a shadow, flickering deep inside the garden, makes her freeze right on the spot. In the dead of night, who is free enough to stroll around out there? The more Hongshui looks, the more unnerved she gets. Could she have actually run into a ghost? Early the next morning, Hongshui hurriedly drags Lan over, vowing with absolute certainty that she met a ghost last night. To make sure it wasn't a dream, she even gave herself a painfully hard pinch. Hearing this, Lan bursts into laughter. She says the Nam Gong household absolutely cannot have ghosts, the reason being that their grand elder is even more terrifying than ghosts and monsters. With just one loud roar from the grand elder, any demon, ghost, or monster would be scared straight into revealing their true form. Hongyu listens, completely dumbfounded, but still feels something is a bit off. That white shadow last night looked truly lonely. Lan sighs helplessly, sets down the water basin in her hands, and says, "My lady, the white shadow you saw is actually none other than our grand elder." Looking at the lavish breakfast before her, Hongshua's state of mind can't calm down at all. While urging her to eat, Nam Gong Hao casually arranges the afternoon schedule. But the sharp-witted Hongshui notices his condition today is even worse than yesterday, his entire being exuding an unhideable exhaustion. It turns out the Grand Elder has suffered from insomnia for many years. What this illness feels like? Hongwei is the one who understands best, because her mother used to be tormented by it as well. Looking at her savior looking so haggard, she feels incredibly bad inside. Probably noticing Hongshui's gaze, Nam Gong Hao suddenly stops his chopsticks, smiles warmly, and asks if she is waiting for him to spoon-feed her. This unexpected joke makes Hongshui's face flush bright red. She hurriedly buries her face and wolfs down her rice repeatedly. The heavy mood from just now is also wiped away by this warm atmosphere. Hongshui cautiously asks Nam Gong Hao if she can go for a stroll by herself. Originally, he intended to go with her personally, but hearing her say she wanted to bond with the maids, he also nodded and agreed to save time. Hongshui ate like a starved wolf, wiping clean the food on the table, which made Nam Gong Hao feel a bit tickled inside. He thought this child had been starved for countless days, but actually, Hongshui already had a plan in her mind. Since the Namgong estate was this huge, there would definitely be a medical clinic. She had to quickly go find a type of herb called nutrition grass to help the Grand Elder cure his insomnia. This was a God-given opportunity for her to repay his kindness, but when she eagerly ran to the medical clinic, Before she could even open her mouth, the other party's words threw a bucket of cold water on her. "We don't have any nutrition grass here at all, Hong." Zhu's face turned completely blank. She thought getting the medicine would be a piece of cake, but who knew it would be a total waste of effort. Tears welled up in her eyes from pure grievance. No one expected that this pitiful, teary-eyed look would make the entire crowd in the medical clinic dazed. Everyone dropped their work and gathered around to stare at her, and some even fidgeted, wanting to reach out and pinch her cheek. Seeing this, the manager hurriedly stepped in to clear up the chaos. Only then did he drag the conversation back to the right topic, asking her what on earth she was looking for that grass for. Hongzhu explained in a tiny voice that she wanted to find medicine to help her family sleep well. Nutrition grass usually grows all over the streets, so how could a huge medical clinic like this not have any? As a result, the other party's answer left Hongsui completely dumbfounded. It turned out the people of the Nam Gong family fundamentally didn't need sleeping medicine. They trained until they were completely exhausted every single day. The moment night fell, they would just crash and sleep like logs. Hongwei still didn't give up, mentioning the fact that Grand Elder Nam Gong Hao couldn't sleep. Who would have thought she would get an even more despairing answer in return? The Grand Elder that absolutely hates the smell of this grass. The moment he smells it, he flies into a furious rage. Mylan helplessly explained further. The Grand Elder's temperament is very quirky. Any medicine that displeases his eyes, the medical clinic doesn't dare to keep even a single stalk. Hearing this, Hongsua slumped. She thought it was some kind of divine medicine, but it turned out, in the eyes of others, this grass was so useless that it had no place at all. What was even more heartbreaking was that although the medical clinic stewed all kinds of nourishing tonics every day, the Grand Elder completely refused to touch them, putting the disciples through absolute hell. Seeing Hongshui looking so gloomy, Mylan hurriedly pointed out a bright path for her, saying that outside in the flower garden, this grass grew in abundance. Normally, everyone just picks it to make a stir-fry dish. Although she was still downcast in her heart, Hongwei didn't want to bother other people anymore. She said her thanks and intended to figure out a way by herself. Hearing the disciples behind her back whisper and pity her, Hongsui felt even more choked up. She always felt she owed everyone too much. If she couldn't even handle a tiny matter like this, she felt herself truly too useless. Hongsui recalled when she was little, she used to ask herself if it was because her mother couldn't sleep that she loathed her so much. To please her mother, she had clung tightly to a maid, begging her, and finally managed to ask about the grass specifically used to treat insomnia. She excitedly prepared everything, naively thinking that as long as she cured her mother's illness, her mother would look at her at least once. But reality dealt her a devastating blow. The medicine she took great pains to prepare was thrown and smashed into pieces. Her mother didn't even bother to turn her head back, her voice terrifyingly cold as she told her to get the hell out of the room, not giving her a single chance to explain. In that very fraction of a second, Hongjue finally realized that there are some fractures that fundamentally cannot be mended with a few stalks of grass. It turned out, from that exact moment, she had been completely abandoned. In her mother's eyes, she felt she wasn't even worth a speck of dust, a thing that mattered little whether it existed or not. That feeling of being cast away had seeped deep into her very bones. But Grand Elder Nam Gong Hao was different. He was so warm. Even if she ended up being loathed in the end anyway, Zhu still wanted to try one last time for the sake of this little bit of warmth. She lit a lantern and took advantage of the dark night to sneak out of her room. In her heart, she silently apologized to Sister Mylan. She only wanted to go to the flower garden to pick a little bit of nutrition grass. Even if it only helped just a tiny bit, she would be satisfied. As a result, because she walked too fast, her foot slipped and she fell flat on the ground. The lantern in her hand also swung violently. Hongxue sat plopped on the ground, unable to get up for the longest time, her knee throbbing with pain. In the dead of night, a strange sound suddenly came from inside the flower garden. Her face turned pale with fear as she froze right on the spot, her mind starting to run wild. Could she have met a ghost? She hurriedly patted her chest to reassure herself. How could there be ghosts in the Namgong estate? Even if there were a ghost, Grand Elder Namgong Hao is way more ferocious than a ghost anyway. Just thinking about him made her less afraid. Hongsui carried her lantern and waddled along, her mouth muttering, I have to quickly pick the medicine and slip away fast. This place is way too spooky. But the naive girl had no idea that there was always a shadow following behind her. Nam Gong Hao hid in the dark corner, watching the little brat acting all stealthy like a thief, his mind utterly confused. Originally, he was afraid it would be dangerous for her to go alone, so he quietly followed her. Who knew he would see this child not sleeping at midnight, crawling into the flower garden to crouch down, looking at Hong Shui busily plucking the grass. Nam Gong-hao completely couldn't understand what that tiny head was plotting. Looking closely, the thing she was holding was nutrition grass. He secretly thought, could this little brat not be sleeping at midnight, just to come out here and play house? However, by the next day, Nam Gong-hao looked at the dark, misshapen medicine pills on the table and casually asked what this was. The maid, my mom, Lan, respectfully replied, "This is the medicine the young miss personally molded from nutrition grass last night, instructing that it was specially made to treat your insomnia." Nam Gong-hao was completely stunned. Even in his dreams, he never expected that the little brat who fell and got covered in mud, who was scared of her own shadow in the flower garden last night, would actually take such a risk all for him. This devotion was weightier than any rare treasure or miraculous herb. Nam Gong-hao let out a long-lost smile and softly lamented, "Truly a sensible child. Thank you for your kind intention, but actually, you don't need to do these things for me." Hearing this, Hong Shui frantically waved her hands, saying she knew her benefactor didn't like the smell of herbal medicine. But it was my benefactor who taught me that good medicine tastes bitter. As she spoke, she tightly crumpled the hem of her skirt. Although her voice was trembling a bit, her attitude was incredibly resolute. She said that every day she had to close her eyes and swallow the extremely bitter Polygonum multiflorum root, so her benefactor absolutely must not back out. Speaking to the very end, Hong Hui decisively put on the face of a strict little old lady and loudly scolded Nam Gong-hao. "Benefactor must take your medicine too. You're absolutely not allowed to be a picky eater." The servants in the estate had been buzzing with gossip lately. The usually majestic and cold Grand Elder had suddenly changed his temperament, eating meals every single day with the little girl he picked up. Everyone thought the Grand Elder was getting old, so he had grown soft, pampering the child like a fragile egg to the point of putting up with her talking back. But who would have guessed that the reality was completely the opposite? Not only was that little brat not afraid of him, but she even dared to point straight at his face and yell loudly, "Don't be a picky eater, eat properly for me." That yell made the maid, my thumb, Lan, standing nearby, almost have her heart drop right out. Anyone who dared to lecture the Grand Elder like that, in this entire world, there was only this single little ancestor. What was even more surprising was that Nam Gong-hao, being scolded in front of a crowd, wasn't angry at all. On the contrary, his smile was so wide his mouth couldn't close. He kept praising the girl for being sharp and quick-witted, while Hong Sui had an incredibly serious face, saying benefactor this and benefactor that, stating this was all for the good of his body. This time, it was Nam Gong-hao's turn to feel a bit awkward in his heart. He leaned in close to negotiate. "Calling me benefactor sounds way too distant. Before this, calling me grandfather sounded so pleasant to the ears." As a result, Hong Shui shook her head frantically, saying that before it was because she was ignorant, but toward her savior, she must address him with absolute respect. Nam Gong-hao looked visibly annoyed, intending to close the distance between them. Who knew the little girl would choke up for half a day and then switch to calling him Grand Elder? His whole hierarchy business was completely ruined. No matter how he heard it, benefactor and Grand Elder sounded deathly distant. Finally, he slapped the table and settled it. "From now on, just call me grandfather." Hong Xie was still hesitant, fearing it would break the rules of the estate. Nam Gong-hao then slapped his chest with a loud thud, declaring that he was the boss around here, and let's see if anyone dared to mutter a single word. My Lan stood nearby, watching, completely dazed. She thought the little girl was about to get scolded, but who knew the Grand Elder would dote on her to his very bones. The moment the word grandfather slipped out, Nam Gong-hao's heart melted completely. Full of joy, he scooped Hong Shui right up, his smug expression utterly impossible to hide. Having been physically exhausted the entire following day, Hong Shui slept like a log and couldn't get out of bed, her whole body dazed, only feeling regret for daring to stay up late last night. My Lan, while surveying her to wake up, smiled warmly and delivered some good news, saying that the Grand Elder was extremely pleased with her performance yesterday. Hearing that, Hong Shui finally felt somewhat relieved. But before she could rejoice, the sound of footsteps suddenly came from outside the door. The person who arrived had a refined demeanor and wore glasses, smiling very gently, introducing himself as the chief manager of the Nam Gong clan, Nam Gong Tu-vu. Seeing such a grand presence, Hong Shui, who was still groggy from sleep, suddenly shrank back, her hands and feet feeling completely out of place, not knowing what to say. She hid behind Mai Lan's back, poking her tiny little head out to timidly greet him. That adorable mannerism almost made the veteran manager forget his entire purpose for coming here. Nam Gong Tu Vu hurriedly made the reason clear. It turned out he came on behalf of the Grand Elder because, thanks to Hong Shui's medicine last night, the Grand Elder had a rare good night's sleep. This medicine is truly effective. Hong Shui was so happy she wanted to jump up and down. The heavy boulder in her heart finally dropped. Nanggong Xiu continued to relay. The Grand Elder saw how good the medicine is, and since it was all thanks to Hong Shui preparing it by hand, he wanted to ask if he could continue to trouble you in the future. Hong Shui accepted immediately, answering back so fast, she wished she could rush straight into the kitchen to stew another pot. Seeing her overly enthusiastic mannerism, Nanggong Xiu couldn't help but chuckle and say there was still leftover medicine, so there was no need to rush. This time, Nanggong Xiu even intentionally brought a gift for her, a highly exquisite mini medicine mortar and pestle set. The little brat was overjoyed, shouting that she would make a whole 100 medicine pills. Taking advantage of Hong Sui being fully engrossed in playing with her new toy, Nanggong Xiu pulled Mai Lan aside to instruct her privately, telling her that she must look after the little master's health carefully and absolutely must not let the girl overwork herself. Mai Lan, however, was curious about one thing. This nutrition grass medicine was also offered up by the medical clinic before, but as a result, the Grand Elder complained about the foul smell, threw it away, and even cursed it as garbage. How did it turn into a miracle elixir that cures 100 diseases once it got into Hong Sui's hands? Hearing this, Nanggong Xiu laughed out loud, saying whether a medicine is effective or not actually depends on who makes it. It seems that, in this lifetime, the Grand Elder has truly been conquered by this little girl. But in his heart, Nanggong Xiu understood very well that once the Grand Elder's doting on Hong Sui spread outside, it would definitely invite a lot of jealousy, and there would even be people dragging her background out to humiliate her and intentionally look for trouble. He put on a serious face and ordered Mai Lan that from now on she must keep her ears perked up. The moment she saw anyone planning to harm Hong Sui, she must report it immediately. After finishing with the official business, Nanggong Xiu pulled out an exquisite red box saying it was the medicine fee the Grand Elder was paying Hong Shui. Mai Lan smiled and helped the little girl open the box. Inside was actually a sparkling, dazzling bracelet. Looking at this treasure, Hong Shui involuntarily spaced out. Before this, back at her house, she never had a single item of her own, only able to watch with wide eyes as others wore the jewelry given by her mother. Who would have thought that the warmth she had yearned for so long would actually become a reality in the Nanggong clan? Mai Lan gasped in admiration, praising the bracelet for being too beautiful, even saying it was the trendiest style as of late. Hong Sui looked at the gift, her eyes unwilling to drift away. Nanggong Xiu, having finished his business, smiled and said goodbye to Hong Sui. Looking at the child's well-behaved manner as she said, "Thank you," he secretly lamented in his heart that this little brat truly makes people adore her. No wonder everyone wants to have a daughter like this, but who knew that it was completely not an ordinary piece of jewelry, but an heirloom treasure of the Nanggong clan, the clear life stone bracelet. This treasure wasn't just for show. As long as one wore it on their body, all fatigue would vanish immediately. No matter how severely one was injured during cultivation, it would only take one night for the body to fully recover to its original state. Outside the door, Nanggong Xiu respectfully reported that the elders from all branches had gathered in full and were currently waiting to meet the Grand Elder. Nanggong Hao didn't bother to turn his head back, tossing a sentence. "Wait until I'm finished with official business, then I will naturally go over." Who would have guessed that the so-called official business in his mouth was actually sitting and accompanying Hong Shui for breakfast? Seeing the little girl eating with a good appetite, his heart was as joyful as a festival. This matter was 10,000 times more important than going to see those old geezers. Looking at the well-behaved Hong Sui in front of him, who could have imagined that this little girl had suffered so much bitterness before? Now she was finally willing to open her heart, timidly calling out, "Grandfather?" Hearing this call, inside Nanggong Hao's heart, he was finally completely at ease. But whenever he thought about the little troublemakers at home, he started to worry for her again. Sure enough, the two grandsons, the moment they saw her, swarmed over like flies. One called her big sister, the other called her little sister. That over-the-top enthusiasm almost drowned the poor girl. It looked like if he wanted Hong Shui to completely adapt to this house, he would still have to spend quite a lot of effort. Nanggong Hao was busy piling delicious food onto her plate, wishing he could stuff the whole world into the little girl's mouth. Who knew Hong Shui would dodge it, absolutely insisting on eating by herself? She said she was no longer a child, and being spoon-fed in front of so many people like this was very embarrassing. Being rejected, Nam Gong-hao slumped. Just a moment ago, he was happy that his grandchild was growing up, but now he felt the joy of raising a kid had completely vanished to who knows where. But thinking about it over and over, a child being sensible was also a good thing. He set his chopsticks down, stood up, and said goodbye. It was time to go resolve those troublesome matters that could no longer be avoided. Nangongshu had been waiting exhaustingly outside the door before finally seeing the Grand Elder push the door and walk out. But before he could even open his mouth, he already sensed a surging, murderous intent. Nam Gong-hao walked with a deadpan face, harboring a bundle of rage inside. He wanted to see what kind of garbage words those old geezers were planning to bark out today. Nangongshu followed closely behind, trembling like a leaf, completely unable to understand what was wrong with the Grand Elder. He was clearly having breakfast happily with the child just a moment ago, but in a flash, he was fuming with murderous intent. This time, the elders in the Great Hall are probably about to face a great disaster. The atmosphere in the Great Hall was suffocatingly tense, with the elders hiding in the back and whispering to each other. Everyone felt that the Grand Elder's aura today was twice as terrifying as usual, even doubting whether they had picked the wrong day to come. Nam Gong-wo, leaning on his cane, led the way to greet him. This old guy, relying on the influential backing behind him, was always the first one to jump out and talk nonsense. Nam Gong-hao coldly looked at his arch-rival, having already written down a little grudge book in her heart. Years ago, because of the fight over the successor position, the two almost ripped each other's faces off on the spot. Since then, Mu Young had become a thorn in Nam Gong-hao's side. It looked like the meeting today was destined not to have a peaceful ending. Seeing Nam Gong-hao remain silent for a long time, Mu Young decisively stopped beating around the bush and went straight to the point. "I heard you just brought back a little girl." Nam Gong-hao calmly set down his teacup and replied that he was merely taking in a helpless, abandoned child, not expecting the elders' information network to be so sharp. To think they would even worry about such a trivial matter. Mu Young still wouldn't let it go, saying that the child was actually placed in the Changtian pavilion, making everyone unable to help but worry that the Nam Gong family is about to have another person of unknown origin. Nam Gong-hao sneered in his heart upon hearing this. These fools are overthinking way too much, actually imagining that he was senile enough to randomly pick a successor for the clan. He understood perfectly well that these old geezers were simply afraid that the appearance of that child would affect the power struggle of the next generation. So, he decisively laid his cards on the table. He had absolutely no intention of adopting a daughter. Just as everyone was about to breathe a sigh of relief, he dropped a bombshell. He would take that child as his direct disciple. Just this single sentence made the entire Great Hall explode. Mu Yang was the first one to jump up in opposition, saying how could a brat of unknown origin be qualified to break the century-old rules of the clan? One must know that Nam Gong-hao is the strongest martial artist in the clan's history. With the moniker Nam Gong Tiger, his martial arts cultivation was enough for him to sit on equal footing with the current martial arts alliance leader. Mu Yang grew more and more agitated as he spoke, criticizing Nam Gong-hao for never having accepted a disciple before, refusing to teach even the biological children of the elders, yet now breaking the rules for an outsider. Nam Gong-hao let out a faint smile and asked him back, "What do you mean by an outsider?" His next sentence left everyone present completely tongue-tied. He asked who among all the people sitting here was actually a true Nam Gong member. If they stubbornly insisted on pure bloodlines, he was afraid that besides himself, no one here would be qualified. Just as the atmosphere dropped to absolute zero, a messenger rushed in frantically. Holding an urgent letter in his hand, he reported that this was a letter personally entrusted by the clan master. Originally, Nam Gong-hao had no desire to read the letter, but hearing that it was sent by his precious son, he immediately snatched it. After all, that brat's brain was nothing to scoff at. The content of the letter was written quite humbly, first acknowledging his father's right to accept a disciple, but also reminding him that he couldn't ignore the life and death of the elders. Therefore, he proposed a plan. If no one is convinced, then decisively hold a martial duel, so that child can use her strength to prove herself. After reading it, Nam Gong-hao couldn't help but laugh. Although this brat wasn't at home, he knew the situation inside out. He knew his old man would never back down, so he intentionally threw out this compromising solution to give both sides a way out. Nam Gong-hao saw right through his son's mind instantly. He thought Hong Xue would definitely lose, which was why he set up a fair duel, giving his father an excuse to give up on accepting the disciple. Too bad that as his father, he had absolutely no intention of losing this time. Nam Gong-hao turned to look at Mu Young, praising his 8-year-old grandson, Dongwoo, for making rapid progress lately. Muyang didn't realize he was walking into a trap, his face full of smugness as he bragged that his grandson was indeed outstanding among his peers. Nam Gong-hao locked in the deal immediately. Since they are both 8 years old, then let's follow the proposal just now and have Dongwoo and Hong Shui fight an open match. As long as Hong Shui wins, the matter of accepting her as a disciple will be set in stone and no one shall stop it. But if Nam Gong Dongwoo wins, this play will stop right here, Nam Gong-hao abruptly announced it was time for Hong Shui to start practicing martial arts. After all, to reconnect her meridians, he had to use a rare treasure like the 10,000-year-old Polygonum multiflorum. Hong Shui was completely stunned. Although she really wanted to learn, she always felt her foundation was too weak. Seeing through the little girl's hesitation, Nam Gong-hao smiled and explained, "This time we won't practice internal arts, we'll start from external arts first." As long as she pushed her body to the absolute limit, she could forge the legendary indestructible Vajra body. Even without a single drop of internal energy, she would still have more than enough power to wipe out opponents on the field. Hong Shui was tongue-tied. Oh, could this be the start of her journey to defy heaven and change her fate? Finally, she made up her mind. As long as she could forge the Vajra body, no matter how bitter or hard it was, she would willingly endure it. Looking at the fighting spirit igniting in the child's eyes, Nam Gong-hao finally felt somewhat at ease. Just yesterday at the elder meeting, Nam Gong-hao had thrown down a critical challenge for Hong Shui. Enter the martial duel, and if she wins, she will become a true direct disciple. But if she loses, she will lose everything and be kicked out of the Nam Gong clan without mercy. This wasn't some ordinary martial arts exchange, but a high-stakes gamble with her future on the line. The match 2 months from now would decide her fate. The opposing elders still wouldn't let it go, insistently forcing Nam Gong-hao to recuse himself and not personally teach Hong Shui, using the beautiful excuse of ensuring fairness to see if this child actually had what it takes. Nam Gong-hao decisively agreed. But in his heart, he knew very well that the stakes of this match were too high, and he couldn't tell Hong Shui for the time being, lest it create too much pressure. Looking at the little girl's bewildered face, he had no choice but to lie, saying he was too busy lately and didn't have time to teach, making Hong Shui feel a bit disappointed and lost. But Nam Gong-hao had already found a replacement. The chief instructor he invited was no ordinary figure. It was none other than Kan Vu, the captain of the Thuongtien squad. The hellish training under this top-tier powerhouse officially began. Although her heart was a million times unwilling, as she only wanted grandfather to teach her martial arts, Nam Gong-hao only needed a few pieces of sweet pastry to successfully coax her and throw her straight into the hands of the new chief instructor. However, the moment training began, Hong Shui finally realized she had taken things way too lightly. Every single move and stance required her to unleash her full strength. This level of physical torment was fundamentally not something a child could endure. From the shadows, Kan Vu's voice rang out chillingly, mocking her weakness and bluntly declaring that a weakling like her, who could be blown away by a gust of wind, had absolutely no right to learn martial arts. Hong Shui gritted her teeth, wanting to stand firm, but facing Kan Vu's terrifying aura, she felt as if she were facing a giant wolf. One slight slip and she would be swallowed whole. What kind of martial arts training was this? She was clearly tightrope walking right in front of the gates of hell. Whether Hong Shui could survive her first day or not had everyone on the edge of their seats. Hong Shui bolted up from her bed. The nightmare just now was too realistic, scaring her half to death. It turned out to be just sleep paralysis. Even though grandfather kept beating his chest to guarantee the new instructor was an incredibly good person, Hong Shui's stomach was still doing flips. After all, the other party was a dog-type beastman. Just thinking about having to face such a fierce character made her feel restless. Instead of hiding in her room, guessing blindly, she might as well go directly to the training field and wait. She intentionally went early to score some bonus points in the eyes of the new instructor. The moment she arrived at the field, Hong Shui saw a figure dancing around. Her first reaction was thinking it was Kan Vu. But looking closer, she discovered the other party was a youth around her own age. That was Nam Gongbok. The long sword in his hand seemed to possess a soul. Every single move and stance was so gorgeous that she couldn't take her eyes off him. Hong Shui watched in fascination. Was this the true sword style of the Nam Gong clan? Although his movements were already absolutely flawless, the sharp-witted Hong Shui noticed that with just a tiny bit more refinement, his realm would definitely undergo a qualitative change. But right at the crucial moment, Nam Gong Bok suddenly withdrew his sword without warning and stood frozen on the spot. He was clearly on the verge of massive success. Why did he abruptly stop? Hong Shui hid in the dark corner, not daring to breathe heavily. Could she have been discovered? Before she could react, a cold flash of light gleamed right before her eyes. Nam Gong Bok suddenly whipped around, the sharp tip of his sword pointing straight at her. He asked in a freezing voice who she was. Peeking at someone else practicing martial arts was a major taboo. Hong Jie panicked, hurriedly bowing her head and frantically apologizing. Saying she didn't mean to, it was just that his sword style was so exquisite, she lost track of time watching it. Nam Gong Bok sheathed his sword and walked over, his tone somewhat peculiar. This place is a restricted area of the clan. Aside from the direct line of the Nam Gong family, outsiders can absolutely never set foot here. Hong Shui was dumbfounded. What on earth did the direct line mean? Looking at the youth in front of her, a thought flashed through her mind. Around her age and part of the direct line, could he be grandfather's eldest grandson, the rumored genius Nam Gong Bok? Before she could open her mouth to confirm, Bok tossed out a chilling sentence. So you're the brat living in the Thuong Kong pavilion. The word brat left Hong Sui dazed, but she also reacted quickly. Since they had to train together in the future, she should just follow the rules and call him senior brother Bok. The greeting sounded incredibly cheerful, but who knew that upon hearing it, Bok's face would turn as black as the bottom of a pot. Hong Sui thought she had been disrespectful, intending to drop to her knees again to perform a grand formal bow to make their connection as martial siblings official. Who knew Bok wouldn't accept it at all, waving his hand in annoyance and saying that was the etiquette for a disciple bowing to a master, telling her to stop right there. Oh well, she had totally barked up the wrong tree. Bok let out a helpless sigh, finding it a waste of breath to talk to this clueless little brat. Hong Sui was just about to apologize when Chief Instructor Kan Vu walked over with long strides, looking at her with confusion and asking who on earth she was talking to just now. Hong Shui whipped around to point, but oh boy, the space behind her was completely empty. Nam Gong Bok had actually vanished right from under her nose. To avoid raising suspicions, Hong Jie could only laugh awkwardly to save face, saying she was just talking to herself because she was too nervous on her first day. Kan Vu didn't think much of it either, asking her in a booming voice if she was ready. Hong Ju clenched her fists tightly and strained her neck to yell back that she would absolutely give it her all. That desperate look of hers actually seemed pretty badass. Who would have noticed that Nam Gong Bok, who had just left, actually hadn't gone far? He was standing on a high balcony, staring intently down at the training field. Hong Sui, who was yelling about wanting to eat 3 big bowls of rice just now, ended up face-planting into a deep sleep before she could even finish her sentence. It looked like the daytime training had completely drained the little girl's energy. Nam Gong Hao looked at the child, his eyes filled with deep heartache. He called Mai Lan over to carry her back to her room, not forgetting to instruct her to remember to put the bracelet on her every single night. He originally intended to personally arrange his grandchild's sleeping place, but right at this moment, an uninvited guest arrived. It was none other than Kan Vu. Nam Gong Hao thought he had come to report on the first day's situation, intending to hear some good news. Who knew Kan Vu would immediately ask to admit his fault the moment he opened his mouth? He lowered his head, his voice filled with absolute helplessness as he asked the Grand Elder to revoke the command. He truly couldn't continue teaching this girl anymore. On the first day, what on earth happened that could actually force a dignified guard captain to this dead end? One must know that Kan Vu is known as the 1,000 Gold Sword Saint, a top-tier powerhouse who had never disobeyed an order, yet today he broke the rule to rebel. Nam Gong Hao demanded to know the reason. Kan Vu replied bluntly, Hong Jie doesn't have the talent to practice martial arts. After just one day, he had seen right through the girl's capabilities. In his eyes, her physique was too pathetic. She couldn't even hold a sword steadily. If she were forced to participate in the duel 2 months from now, besides bringing her pain, it wouldn't serve any purpose whatsoever. Faced directly with this complete denial, Nam Gong Hao remained strangely calm. He only asked Kan Vu a single question. Have you personally asked the child if she wants to learn martial arts? And for what reason she is absolutely determined to hold that sword? Kan Vu was tongue-tied. Only at this moment did he realize with a shock that he was only busy looking at her talent while never once trying to see through the child's inner heart. Nam Gong Hao didn't force him at all, telling Kan Vu to go ask about Hong Sui's true wish himself before making a decision. But his next sentence made Kan Vu feel completely restless. Nam Gong-hao demanded that if the girl wants to learn, he must directly teach her the ultimate art of the clan, the Thuong Thien sword style. Kunvu couldn't believe his own ears. In his opinion, Hongshui couldn't even carry a wooden sword properly right now, and her foundation in sword force hadn't even been touched. To suddenly learn supreme martial arts like this was truly reckless. But Nam Gong-hao's attitude was unshakable. Trust me. And do as I say. Faced with the authority of the Grand Elder, Kunvu finally bowed his head and accepted the order, choosing loyalty. Yet in his heart, Kunvu was still conflicted. He believed that the Grand Elder was truly senile this time, forcing a little girl with zero internal energy to participate in a life-and-death duel. What kind of training was this? This was pushing the girl straight to her death. While he was having a massive headache over this, Honghu's piercing scream suddenly rang out from the yard. It turned out to be those little brats. Nam Gongji was hiding behind the fence, spying. Kunvu's face darkened as he kicked those troublemakers straight out. Although young, Ji was still grumbling about wanting to make friends. This was absolutely not playtime. Seeing Hongshui shrinking back in fear, Kunvu let out a helpless sigh. This child was so timid that a rustle in the wind would startle her. The upcoming special training was likely going to be many times harder than imagined. Kunvu always believed that a martial artist, if they lacked the will to fight, might as well pack their bags and go home to save everyone the trouble. So he decided to lay his cards on the table, forcing Hongshui to back down in the face of difficulties. He unleashed the most brutal training regimen, forcing her to carry a log larger than her own body, push a boulder standing as tall as a small mountain, and even run 50 penalty laps around the field. Applying this intensity to a skinny little girl was truly savage torture. Kunvu stood with his arms crossed, observing coldly, fully convinced that this girl would absolutely not last through tonight. He was certain that tomorrow morning she would be crying and begging him for mercy. But who would have guessed that even though she was exhausted to the point of being unable to stand steadily, Hongshui didn't utter a single word of complaint. Just like that, the first day of hellish training passed. Kunvu thought smugly to himself that tomorrow the girl would definitely quit. As a result, the next morning, Honghui was still there right on time, bowing respectfully as if she hadn't been physically tortured yesterday at all. It was Kunvu's turn to be dumbfounded. With that intensity of torture, even the elite soldiers of the Thuong Thien squad would be bedridden right now. What on earth was this brat made of? Kunvu realized that just using physical strength probably wouldn't break her, so he schemed a change of tactics, pointing up to a towering wooden pole that touched the clouds, casually placing a bird feather on the very top. Kunvu said indifferently, "Today's task is very simple. Go fetch that bird feather and bring it here." Hongzhi tilted her neck to look at the completely smooth pole, utterly stunned. This time, Kunvu was way too cruel. This climbing training was originally supposed to be done with gloves on, but he intentionally didn't hand them out, fully intending to make her taste absolute misery. So this girl would quit out of sheer pain. Kunvu coldly left behind one sentence: "If you can't get it, don't even think about touching a sword again." Hongzhi didn't shrink back at all, gripping tightly onto the coarse, rough rope, exerting all her life's strength to climb up. But before she could get very far, her foot slipped and she fell with a thud straight to the ground. The friction from the rope left her tiny hands swollen and red, like strawberry syrup. That burning, stinging pain was something even adults might not be able to endure. Kunvu stood there, waiting for her to burst into tears, waiting for her to open her mouth and ask to go home. Who knew Hongshui would just blow on her syrup-red hands? And without saying a word, dust herself off and snap right back up. In that child's eyes, there wasn't a single shred of giving up. Kunvu's heart skipped a beat. Hongshui kept telling herself, "I can do it, I can definitely do it." But reality was just too brutal. Time after time, she grabbed the rope, only to fall with a thud back onto the ground. Looking at that tiny figure, covered in mud, falling repeatedly under the evening glow, Kunvu, who had fully intended to make things difficult, actually started to soften his heart. As twilight set in deeper, he couldn't bear to watch any longer, about to step forward to tell her to stop and give her an out to continue training tomorrow. But before the words could leave his mouth, Hongshui frantically cut him off, gripping the rope tightly, absolutely refusing to let go, even forcing out a smile. "Master, let me try one last time. If you're tired, you can head back and rest first." Kunvu was stunned. He never expected that in this child's very bones there would be such a stubborn, unyielding streak. He sighed. "Fine, just try this one last time." Looking at her desperate mannerism, Kanvu felt really uncomfortable in his heart. He saw that though the girl was persistent, there are some deep chasms that can't be filled just by trying hard. In his eyes, her current persistence was just walking straight into trouble, instead of planting hope only to watch it shatter. It was better to douse it with a bucket of cold water to wake her up early from the dream, preventing her from sinking deeper later on. Kanvu was making wild guesses again. The girl trained way too hard today. She's probably dragging her dead body back to her room by now. Nam Gong-hao saw Kanvu walk in and asked, "What ill wind blew you to this old man today?" Kanvu bowed and explained that he was still anxious over the matter of Hong Sui, fearing the heavy training intensity would break the girl's body. The moment he heard his granddaughter's name, Nam Gong-hao paused for a beat, swallowing the words that were at the tip of his tongue. Finally, he waved his hand and told Kanvu there was no need to worry. "I'll take care of the rest myself." Nam Gong-hao profoundly reminded Kanvu, no matter what she manages to cultivate in the future, that unyielding heart of hers is the rarest thing to find. It was getting late, so Kanvu excused himself, but in his mind, he was still calculating something else. He felt the grand elder was thinking too simply. With yesterday's intensity, how could that scrawny little body endure? Sure enough, when he arrived at the training field the next day, the atmosphere was cold and deserted, with not a soul in sight. He mocked himself with a laugh. Looks like the brat is truly exhausted. Lasting up to this point can already be considered a miracle. Just as he was about to turn around and walk away, a clear, crisp voice rang out behind him. "Master!" Kanvu raised his head and froze instantly. Hong Sui was sitting snugly, perched all the way at the top of that towering pole. He couldn't believe his eyes. Did this brat actually stay up all night clinging to the pole just to practice this basic drill? On the contrary, Hong Sui had a completely casual face, saying she just kept climbing relentlessly until morning, so she decisively sat up there to watch the sunrise. Kanvu really had to bow down to this little ancestor. Being up there was incredibly dangerous, so he grumbled and urged her to climb down quickly. But who would have guessed that just as she was about to jump down, her foot slipped and her entire body went into a headfirst freefall from midair. Oh boy, if she hit the ground from this fall, the consequences would be catastrophic. In that split second when her life hung by a thread, Kanvu lunged like an arrow, firmly catching her right into his arms. Lying in Kanvu's arms, Hong Sui sheepishly muttered, "I'm sorry," saying that just now she was indeed completely exhausted. Before Kanvu could even scold her, the little girl smacked her forehead and shouted that the bird feather was still stuck at the top, asking tentatively if she had to climb back up to get it down. Kanvu intentionally teased her. "What if I insist that you must get it no matter what?" Though her face was grimacing, Hongyu still gritted her teeth, bracing herself to try again. Seeing the little girl's serious attitude, Kanvu stopped smiling entirely and asked solemnly, "Ms. Hong Sui, why exactly are you so stubborn about learning martial arts?" Hong Sui puffed out her flat chest and answered with absolute seriousness. No matter what grandfather's intentions were, the thing she wanted to learn most was to forge an indestructible Vajra body that was immune to all pain and injuries. This answer was truly top tier, instantly leaving Kanvu speechless. Kanvu found it a bit strange. If she wanted to train the Vajra body, why not become a monk and go up to the Shaolin temple instead of staying around the Nam Gong household to practice external arts? Hongyu explained thoroughly that as long as her external arts were mastered, even without internal energy, she could still rely on that skill to earn a living in the future. She cheerfully blinked her eyes and asked Kanvu whether people like her could work as bodyguards for others in the future. Hearing this made Kanvu's heart heavy, so he could only go along with her. "Of course you can. Working as an escort warrior, transporting goods, or being a wandering vagabond, roaming the martial world is totally fine too." Hongju smiled from ear to ear, rejoicing because it turned out she could do so many things. After all, she always firmly believed she wasn't a biological blood relative of the Namgong family, and sooner or later, the day would come when she'd have to pack her bags and leave. She had to look out for her own body first. Looking at this child who was so sensible, it was heartbreaking. Hanvu fell into deep thought. It turned out the one with the narrow vision was actually him. He had always thought this child had shallow thoughts, but only now did he realize that the unyielding grit in her bones wasn't inferior to an adult's at all. He looked at Hong Shui with a stern face and declared in a booming voice, "Starting tomorrow, I will personally teach you the ultimate art, the Nam Gong Thuong Thien sword style." Hong Shui couldn't believe her own ears. That was the closely guarded ultimate technique of the Nam Gong clan. Kanvu promised that from now until she grew up, he would protect her so she could grow up in peace within this clan. Since she was practicing swordplay, she needed a weapon that fit her hands. Kanvu planned to personally carve a wooden sword for her, according to her body size. Hongsue was so touched her eyes turned red, her mouth constantly sobbing as she called him her benefactor, while burying her head in Kanvu's chest. Kanvu laughed it off and comforted the little girl, saying that calling him a benefactor over such a trivial matter was way too dramatic. He also warned the kid that when roaming the martial world, the scariest thing is owing a debt of gratitude just like this. From afar, Nam Gong Bak had witnessed everything. He truly couldn't understand what kind of magic martial arts possessed to make that brat risk her life to such an extent. Clearly, in this lifetime, she didn't need to break her neck worrying about survival. In his heart, Bak understood all too well that someone had already calculated everything to protect that girl for life. Nam Gong Hao gazed at Hongsue's tiny figure, filled with pride but mixed with overwhelming heartache. He wished the girl would grow up a bit slower and not carry responsibilities on her shoulders too early. Seeing Bak turn around, intending to leave, Hao called out sharply, telling him to stay a bit longer. He didn't expect that whenever people weren't looking, he would put on such a cold face, which was truly extremely discourteous. Nam Gong Hao patiently advised Bak, saying he heard a rumor that the precious young lady of the Dung family had some feelings for him. What was her name, Dung Tao Tu? The elders of both families were currently having a headache trying to arrange this marriage. Who knew Bak would clench his two fists and coldly snap back? What is the point of doing all these things? Before Nam Gong Hao could compose himself, the boy exploded. He whipped around and yelled, questioning why they were arranging a marriage for a dying man, because he himself knew all too well that a short-lived guy like him would probably not survive to the day he could wear the groom's wedding robes. Nam Gong Bak in the past was never someone this cold. He used to be so gentle and considerate. Nam Gong Hao spoke up with heartache. How has your health been feeling lately? Nam Gong Bak only replied indifferently. What's the point of asking this? After all, it's always been the same. Even when Nam Gong Hao proactively extended an invitation to have breakfast together, he only replied with silence, then turned his back and walked away without looking back. The distance between the two seemed to grow further and further apart. Watching the gradually vanishing silhouette, a sense of heartache rose within Nam Gong Hao's heart. What on earth should he do with this child? In another development, Hongjae was completely engrossed in practicing with the wooden dummy, drenched in sweat but absolutely refusing to stop. Kanvu stood nearby, reminding the little girl that she didn't need to treasure that wooden sword that much. Who knew Hongjae would seriously argue back? This is a gift you gave me, master. Of course I have to treat it like a precious treasure. Kanvu burst out laughing, promising that if the sword ever broke, he would carve a new one for her anytime. Although this child's physical strength is only average, her comprehension is terrifyingly high. No matter how heavy the sword is, she can still hit the bullseye with pinpoint accuracy. Kanvu secretly marveled in his heart. Since Nam Gong Bak, this was the first time he had met a student with such talent. Hong Jue, with an innocent face, asked if she was as amazing as senior brother Bak. Hearing this form of address, Kanvu froze for a beat. One must know that no one here dared to casually call that young master senior brother. Kanvu then suggested that from now on, she should just call that young master brother. Brother, for convenience. Hongjue tried calling him that once, though she found it a bit cheesy. Just thinking about his divine, mind-blowing sword style made her feel a secret joy in her heart. But it was truly strange. She hadn't seen him come to practice at all lately. Right at that moment, the yard suddenly became extremely noisy. A bunch of uninvited guests aggressively barged in. Hong Yu backed away in fear, screaming at the top of her lungs. There's a monster kidnapping people! Kanvu, on the other hand, coldly glared at those people. What do you mean, monster? They were all familiar faces. Just as Kanvu was about to fly into a raging fury, they grinned and apologized. It turned out these guys were members of the Thuong Tien squad, who intentionally ran over here just to see the rumored young lady's face. The leading man excitedly said, Honghui is currently a trending name in the squad. Even the folks from the medical clinic praised the little girl for being cute. But the most shocking news was that even their chief instructor, who was as cold as an iceberg, doted on the little girl to the absolute max. That wooden sword was actually carved by the chief instructor himself, pulling an all-nighter. Everything was now crystal clear. The whole crowd secretly whispered to each other, absolutely certain that this child was a fox spirit reincarnated. Otherwise, how could she make the chief instructor so captivated to that extent? Honghui stood frozen like a statue. It turned out Master had actually stayed up all night to make the sword for her. Right then, Kanvu, with a pitch-black face, suddenly spoke up. Talking this much, it seems today's training intensity is way too light. The disciples, not knowing any better, even dared to tease him, asking if the chief instructor was blushing. As a result, they immediately received a penalty of running 500 laps around the field. Kanvu saw that the situation was looking bad, so he made an excuse telling Hong Shui to pack up her things and go rest. Staying in this place of drama for one more second was just asking for trouble. The squad members in the back cried out for help, but whenever they opened their mouths to beg, another 50 laps were added. Hong Yu booked it and ran for her life, not daring to look back, leaving this hot mess for them to clean up themselves. Only after a while did she escape. Hong Yu patted her chest while gasping. When Master flies into a rage, he is truly no different from a demon. However, in her heart, as scary as Master was, he only ranked second. Ranking dead last was none other than the two boys currently rushing toward her. Although grandfather kept explaining that those two boys just wanted to make friends, Hong Shui understood all too well. What do you mean, friends? They were the absolute nightmare of her life. Whenever the two hovered nearby, her entire body would get goosebumps. The horrific memories of the past flooded back. Hong Shui could never forget how those people used to bully her, tricking her into drinking that foul, rotten root water and then standing there with their hands on their hips, laughing mercilessly. She had tried to believe that these two boys would be different, but the brutal reality slapped her hard across the face. They popped in and out like ghosts, inviting her to play with their mouths, but their eyes looked at her as if she were a delicious prey. Only at this point did Hong Sui snap out of it. What do you mean making friends? This was clearly blatant bullying. If they discovered she was a cat, she was afraid that in the next second, she would be swallowed whole as a snack. Right now, Hong Jue just wanted to run straight back to her room to hide. But these two little ancestors wouldn't let her go, stubbornly insisting that she join their bizarre games. Every single game sounded exhausting. First wanting to go behind the house to dig tunnels, then planning to sneak off to chew on grandfather's shoes. Hong Jue was speechless hearing this. What kind of quirky hobbies were these? Noticing that Hong Shui had no interest, Nam Gongxia blurted out, "Then let's play fetch. After all, you're a cat, right?" Hong Wei was just about to refuse, but her entire body suddenly froze on the spot, her mind buzzing and going completely blank. Oh no, everything is ruined. The secret that she is a cat. How on earth did they find out? Hong Wei racked her brains, but couldn't understand why her earth-shattering secret leaked out. She had clearly hidden it so well. Yet in the end, she was still caught red-handed. Could it be that today she would be kicked out of here, and even her little life wouldn't be saved? Right when she was planning to transform to escape, Nam Gongxia suddenly reached his hand out. Hong Shui's heart seemed to stop beating. Who would have guessed that the thing he brought out was actually an exquisitely made mouse plushie? It turned out they had prepared it beforehand. There was no interrogation at all, but a special meeting gift dedicated to a little cat. To get this cat-luring toy, they had begged the tailor for several days straight, just because they wanted to bring a smile to Hong Shui's face. Hong Shui timidly asked, "Could it be that you guys don't hate me? You're from the cat tribe, after all." As a result, one sentence from the other party left her completely speechless. It turned out that from the very first day she set foot in the house, everyone already knew everything about her. Now Hong Shui was flustered, truly so embarrassed that she couldn't even hide her cat ears. However, in her heart she was still full of doubts. She admitted to herself that she was illiterate and had never experienced love. So this gentleness that arrived all too suddenly, was she really worthy of it? To reassure Hong Sui, they had intentionally embroidered a unique symbol on the plushie so that anyone looking at it would know this was her precious treasure. Seeing the little girl still feeling down because she was illiterate, Nam Gongxia hurriedly comforted her, saying his own handwriting was also as bad as chicken scratch, and as long as she could remember her name, it would be fine. For the first time in her life, Hong Shui felt such warmth. She hesitantly said thank you, but in return the other party made a new request. From now on, she was forbidden from calling them young master. Just call them brother, directly. This feeling of being a family member made Hong Sui want to bring out everything good she had to repay them. She pulled the silk ribbon down from her hair. Even though this was just something Mylan made by utilizing leftover fabric, to her, it was her only asset, the finest token of gratitude she could possibly give away. Hong Hui carefully tied a ribbon to Nam Gongxia's waist. Although the item looked a bit old, the boy was as happy as if he had struck gold. Seeing this, Nam Gongjia panicked and threw a tantrum demanding a gift too. Hongju smiled and hooked her finger, casually tying a cute bow for him, looking at Ji being as well-behaved as a puppy. Hongju couldn't help but burst out laughing. She said, "This way your beautiful eyes can be clearly seen." Now, the heavy boulder in Hong Shui's heart truly dropped. It turned out all this time she had been worrying over nothing. Everyone really treated her as family. If everyone was this kind-hearted, then the one who had never shown his face, Nangongbak, must also be a gentle person, right? While they were chatting animatedly, Nangongbak suddenly appeared without warning. The lively atmosphere was instantly frozen. Hongsue didn't expect to run into him here either. He still wore that deadpan face, saying he just wanted to find a quiet corner. Nangongjia and Nangongxia were scared out of their wits, immediately frantically explaining that the practice session had ended and the two absolutely didn't slack off. Hongyu also softly called out, "Brother." Seeing Bok's displeased expression, she nervously explained that changing the way she addressed him was Master's idea. If it didn't sound right to his ears, it was fine if she called him senior brother again. Nangongbak turned on his heel and walked away, indifferently tossing back a sentence. "I don't practice martial arts anyway, so it's all the same no matter what you call me." That attitude of being 1,000 miles away made Hongshu extremely anxious. Was he really angry? Nangongxia let out a sigh, saying that Bok had always had a quirky temperament, especially after a near-death illness during his childhood. He became incredibly sensitive. Hearing the word illness, Hongshui almost couldn't stand firm. What kind of dreadful disease could possess the power to alter a person's personality to such an extent? It turned out that at the age of 8, Nangongbak was poisoned by an unknown toxic gas. And the poison just kept eating deep into his body. Malicious rumors claimed he would hardly survive past the age of 20. Nangongxia comforted Hongshui, saying that after all, their mother used to be a renowned divine doctor, so she would definitely find a way to cure him. But in her heart, Hongshui still couldn't help but feel heartache. No wonder Nangongbak always kept a terrifyingly calm expression, even cold to the point of being heartless. Could it be that deep down in his heart, he had accepted himself as a hopeless case? To dispel the gloomy atmosphere, Nangongxia suddenly shifted focus with a joke, saying that in the house, the eldest brother was usually the hot-headed one. The second brother was the gentlest, while the youngest was definitely the biggest crybaby. The moment the words left his mouth, Nangongji threw a tantrum, openly pulling Hongshua's hand and starting his snitching session, saying it was because his older brothers played too violently. Hongju laughed until her stomach hurt, but who would have guessed? As joyful as the daytime was, the night was just as miserable. Snuggled comfortably in her blanket, Honghui suddenly felt her claws itching like crazy. This must be a cat's instinct. Having not transformed back into her original form for too long, her claws had grown oversized. If she didn't sharpen them right away, the claws would curve back and pierce into her paw pads. Reaching her absolute limit, she decided to take advantage of everyone being fast asleep to transform back into her cute cat form, to secretly trim these annoying claws. Accompanied by a soft meow, a tiny, snow-white little head poked out from the blanket. It looks like tonight the chubby little cat is about to go on a shady mission. In her cat form, Hongshui was busily searching for a sturdy post to sharpen her claws. Who could have guessed that in the dead of night, there would be a strange noise in the room? While she was looking around in confusion, a gray shadow suddenly darted out from a tight corner. Hongyu froze completely. The creature acting all sneaky right in front of her was actually a mouse. Who could have guessed this ordinary mouse actually had a glorious past, having barely survived under the claws of the cat species before? Though it luckily escaped death thanks to pure luck, from then on, it suffered from severe cat phobia. Whenever it saw the shadow of its natural enemy, its soul would leave its body. To escape the hunters, it ran for its life all the way to the Namgong mansion, even though it often got chased around by the maids holding brooms here. As long as there were no cats to it, this place was an absolute paradise. Here, it not only built a decent home, but also found a peaceful harbor, filled with hope for a happy future. It thought it had found a safe haven, but who could have guessed that the moment it poked its head up, its nightmare stood right before its eyes? Well, it's all over now. Even in its dreams, it wouldn't dare think that seemingly innocent girl was a closeted feline assassin. If it knew, it wouldn't have let its guard down for a bite of food. While it closed its eyes waiting for death, the scariest thing didn't happen. On the contrary, it felt something soft pushing right against its snout. Hongxue gently whispered, "Mr. Little Mouse, this is a rice cake I saved for you. Eat it quickly while it's hot." It was the mouse's turn to be dumbfounded. It turned out the prey who thought it was about to be devoured was actually served a delicious treat. Who could have guessed a clash between a cat and a mouse would end with such a happy ending? Not only did Hongshui not make a move, she even shared food with the opponent, saying her grandfather taught her to always yield to the weak. This mouse, named Tu Hamliet, had lived all these years, but had never witnessed such a grand scene. It was moved to tears, vowing to bring its entire family and clan to be Hong Shui's loyal underlings for life. Now it was Hong Shui's turn to freeze. She clearly just wanted to do a good deed, but who knew she'd score a whole army of mouse minions? This mouse didn't hesitate either, immediately marketing itself, claiming to not only have supreme scouting skills, but also a talent for stealing things right under everyone's noses. Hong Shui's eyes lit up upon hearing this. Isn't this the ultimate informant? Now that she had someone to answer all her questions, she had to ask it for a huge favor, taking advantage of this chance. The training field of the Namgong clan today was unusually lively. Even the core figures who rarely showed their faces were all present today. Hong Shui hid herself in a dark corner to listen. It turned out there was a highly important martial arts match today. Unfortunately, at the crucial moment, Master had an urgent matter and left, leaving the little girl all alone at the training field. While Hong Shui was looking around blankly, a haughty voice rang out from behind. The newcomer was none other than the true mainline descendant of the Namgong clan, Namgong Tongvu. This guy smelled like trouble the moment he opened his mouth, intending to use his status to intimidate others. Who knew Hong Shui wouldn't be fazed at all, popping his balloon of pride with just one line. "Who are you?" She completely deflated the opponent's ego. Namgong Tongvu jumped up in fury. It turned out this silly-looking teenager was actually her opponent today. Looks like even before the fight, the two had already formed a grudge. Namgong Tongvu continued to spit bitter words, boldly declaring that one day the entire world would have to remember his great name. However, Hong Shui didn't care in the slightest. It made sense. Usually she met only top-tier talents, plus her cold older brother, Namgong Bak. Compared to this guy who was hailed as a mainline genius, his vibe was truly too pathetic, even a bit ridiculous. The pitiful look in Hong Shui's eyes was like a splash of cold water onto Namgong Tongvu's self-esteem, driving him completely insane. He screamed loudly in front of everyone, insulting Hong Shui for having no right to stand here. But the louder he got, the more his cowardice was exposed. Not only was he arrogant, he was also thick-skinned. He intentionally kicked his shoe away, putting on an act that his foot slipped, ordering Hong Shui to go pick it up. He even smugly used the clan's favor to threaten her, taking her servitude for granted. Hong Yu remained silent. Although this guy's personality was utterly trash, the Namgong clan indeed had given her a massive favor. For the sake of the bigger picture, she had to swallow her pride. But just as she was bending down intending to pick it up, a hand suddenly reached out. Namgong Bak appeared right on time. His freezing tone sent chills down everyone's spines. "Let me personally fetch the shoe for Namgong Tongvu." The guy who was just bragging like a king now turned pale with fear. Namgong Bak's grip tightened by the second, questioning him on what exactly the favor he spoke of was. If it's about receiving favors from the clan, he also knew there was a character like that. Elder Namgong Vo-an. Hong Shui stood frozen. What did Bak's words mean? Why did an elder in the family also owe a debt of gratitude? Namgong Bak didn't stop there, continuing to expose him. Elder Namgong Vo-an, back then, also just came from the slums, luckily taken in by the Namgong clan, and then relied on using all kinds of schemes to climb to his position today. Yet a person who once lived on charity could be so heartless to a child in the same plight. It seems your lineage has completely forgotten its roots. Finally, Bak dropped a cold warning. Next time you dare to be disrespectful to a guest, it means you are disrespecting the Namgong clan. Namgong Tongvu was utterly humiliated, hurriedly tucking his tail and running straight away. Hong Shui, hiding nearby, watched in daze, rushing over to thank him, but Bak didn't care, only brushing it off. "I only did it for the clan's honor." Hong Shui intended to invite him to stay and watch the martial arts match, but before the words could leave her mouth, Bak had already turned his back and walked straight away, without giving any face at all. With this kind of temperament, there's afraid to be plenty of trouble ahead. Hong Shui wondered. Bak is clearly a good person, so why is he so distant? On the contrary, Namgong Tongvu had completely lost control. Even though his grandfather, Namgong Vo-an, comforted him, he not only wasn't grateful, but also vented all his anger onto him. He scolded him straight to his face in public, insulting him that he wasn't a real Namgong family member, just someone picked up from the streets. He even blamed the humiliation he had to endure as being caused by him. These words were no different from rubbing salt into Namgong Vo-an's heart. After speaking, he stormed off, leaving Namgong Vo-an standing there in a daze. He told himself that the match was about to take place. Scolding at this time would only make his grandson's mindset even more unstable, so he had to swallow the bitterness and take all the blame upon himself. In a flash, the match officially began. Namgong Tongvu reluctantly stepped onto the arena, his hand tightly gripping the sword. But clearly, the rage in his heart was still burning intensely. Below the arena, the elders cheered and encouraged him, advising him to be careful not to get hurt. On the opposite side, Hong Xue sharp-wittedly noticed the boy's murderous eyes. With such an unstable mindset, this match will likely have an unexpected twist. Watching Namgong Tongvu being supported by his family, Hong Xue felt a pang of envy. But before she could feel sad, around the arena suddenly became a chaotic mess. First Master, then the senior brothers, and even the people from the medical clinic carrying heavy medicine chests ran over, just fearing their little precious would get a single scratch. Such a crowded and bustling scene instantly turned Hong Xue into the favorite child of the entire clan. Facing this situation, Namgong Tongvu could only stare with wide eyes. Hong Xue thought to herself, isn't this just a friendly match? Why, is everyone even more tense than the actual participants? Old man Namgong Hao couldn't sit still, directly coaching from the spectator stands. He nudged the people around him away, constantly making hand signals to Hong Xue. She stared intently at his lip movements for a long time before understanding his meaning was telling her to find the opponent's weakness and then flip him over. Before she could think any further, the referee shouted loudly, demanding silence, and the match officially began. The moment the match started, Namgong Tongvu immediately attacked like a storm. Relying on overwhelming strength, he continuously forced Hong Xue to step back. The sound of wooden swords, clashing loudly, echoed throughout the spectator stands. Namgong Tongvu continuously unleashed strikes, leaving Hong Xue with no choice but to frantically dodge. The situation was extremely dangerous. On the spectator stands, Namgong Xia was anxiously restless, fearing something bad would happen to Hong Xue. He hurriedly asked Master Kanvu if this was okay. However, Kanvu appeared calm, only indifferently replying to just keep watching. The more he fought, the more anxious Namgong Tongvu felt. His opponent popped in and out, just like a flying squirrel. No matter how aggressively he attacked, that little girl still gently dodged every lethal blow. The spectator stanza whispered. Kanvu explained that it turned out the sword style that Hong Xue just practiced happened to be the very skill Namgong Tongvu was using. His moves were completely red. Old man Namgong Hao triumphantly slapped his thigh, certain that Hong Xue held the victory. Who knew Kanvu would drop a sentence that left Namgong Xia stunned? These past few days, I only focused on teaching the girl how to dodge strikes, but haven't bothered to teach any offensive moves yet. In a fight where you only know how to dodge, how can you win? On the spectator stands, old man Namgong Hao was still boldly bragging that he had already given the winning secret to Hong Xue beforehand. Who would have guessed that before his words could sink in, the situation on the stage turned around rapidly. Namgong Tongvu suddenly unleashed a thunderous strike, backing Hong Xue into a corner, causing shouts and jeers to erupt all over the spectator stands. Everyone could clearly see the little girl had nowhere left to run. Namgong Tongvu smirked, completely certain that victory was in his hands. At that exact deciding moment, Namgong Hao's voice echoed next to Hong Xue's ears. He's letting his guard down. Hit him with the ultimate palm strike right now. Hong Xue immediately followed orders. A strike that seemed weak actually carried a terrifyingly mind-blowing power. Before Namgong Tongvu could understand what happened, he was sent flying far away. The surrounding audience was stunned. Kanvu stared with wide eyes, unable to believe what he just saw. This young lady has never practiced palm techniques, so how could she pull off such a scary fatal move? Namgong Hao calmly replied, she probably figured it out on her own. But thinking about this over and over, something still felt completely off. Having no internal energy, yet already mastering an ultimate skill on her own, this isn't a genius. This is a straight-up monster. Namgong Hao softly whispered into her ear, warning Hong Xue that she was only allowed to use this strike once, and moreover, hidden deep within her body, there seemed to be another earth-shattering secret. Namgong Tongvu lay sprawled out, panting heavily as he looked at the sword tip pointing straight at his face, knowing he had lost the match. Even though his heart was bitter and unresigned, he could only hang his head and admit defeat. The whole spectator stands fell into silence, and the referee just stood there, frozen, not yet recovering from the shock. Namgong Hao couldn't help himself, yelling to urge the referee to quickly announce the result. Hong Xue's counterattack was truly a visual feast. The referee loudly called out the name of the winner, Hong Xue. Furthermore, the reward for this resounding victory was becoming the direct disciple of the Grand Elder. The moment the words left his mouth, Hong Shui was dazed as whispers and gossip broke out. No one expected the Grand Elder to actually take in a disciple. Hong Shui was puzzled. Could this martial arts match really be that important? She thought grandfather was just joking around for fun. Thinking back now, if she had slipped up and lost just now, her entire life's future would have likely gone up in smoke. While she was shivering with chills, Nam Gong Hao hurriedly ran over right after the match ended. Hong Zhu immediately blamed her grandfather for not telling her about the reward beforehand. But Nam Gong Hao didn't care at all, only busy flexing and bragging. Seeing this, Master Kanvu had no choice but to intervene. Seeing how happy you are, it's like you're marrying off your daughter. The words were playful, but Nam Gong Hao's attitude carried something a bit deeper. Seeing him utterly overjoyed, Hong Xue's anger also cooled down a bit. However, she was still harboring a question in her heart. How on earth could she unleash that earth-shattering strike just now? The smile on Nam Gong Hao's face vanished, giving way to absolute seriousness. He explained that the technique was called the Heavenly Thunder Palm, and its bursting power relied entirely on Hong Xue's special constitution. To avoid walls having ears, Nam Gong Hao decided to use the ultimate technique of telepathic voice transmission. Finally, the secret was revealed. That Heavenly Thunder Palm strike just now was the result of a clash between the two currents of yin and yang energy inside Hong Xue's body. It wasn't any kind of sudden awakening, but because she had once swallowed a 10,000-year-old fleece flower root. The powerful medicinal efficacy temporarily buffed her meridians, allowing her to borrow internal energy for a split second. Nam Gong Hao warned Hong Xue that she must not use that technique a second time. Once the medicinal effect runs out, if she tries to force it, the internal energy will cause her meridians to shatter, and even a god descending to earth wouldn't be able to save her. Hong Xue slumped, thinking she was a martial arts prodigy. But who knew she was just on a free trial? Understanding her thoughts, Nam Gong Hao comforted her. As long as you practice hard, there will come a day when you truly master this power. Hearing those encouraging words, the light sparked again in the little girl's eyes. Nam Gong Hao ordered that before they could find a cure for her strange condition, Hong Xue had to start with external arts. Since she won the match, the reward was obviously a must. Nam Gong Hao's mood was extremely hyped up, patting his chest to let Hong Xue choose freely. Even if she wanted to pluck the stars from the sky, he would grant it. Right at that moment, the defeated Nam Gong Tongvu silently turned to leave. His wounds, which hadn't even been bandaged yet, made his silhouette look even more lonely. Out of nowhere, Hong Xue suddenly spoke up. She loudly declared that she had decided on her reward, but her wish left everyone completely dumbfounded. She didn't need treasures, sword styles, or miraculous elixirs. She only asked to speak privately with Nam Gong Tongvu. Everyone was confused, not understanding what this young lady was plotting. Hong Xue was extremely resolute, slamming the door shut and forbidding anyone from entering, leaving the crowd of elders outside frantically anxious. Nam Gong Hao, however, remained completely calm, even casually chatting with Kanvu, asking him if marrying his wife back in the day was out of free will dating. Hearing this, Kanvu dreamily recalled the past, proudly bragging that his lady and he were originally childhood sweethearts, and back then, after a sword duel, the two of them also stayed in a private room alone. To learn from experience. The moment the words left his mouth, he suddenly froze. Wait, why does my love story sound exactly like those two in the room? Old man Nam Gong Hao also got a bit paranoid at this point. Although the two kids are still young, a lonely boy and a lonely girl staying together in the same room is indeed worrying. He shook his head in disappointment. Having just won a martial arts match, he already had to painfully stress over his granddaughter's marriage. The two boys, Nam Gong Xia and Nam Gong Jie, were hiding far away, their imaginations racing wild and far, Xia flatly stated. There's no way it's a marriage proposal. She probably wanted to drag that guy into a dark corner to beat him to a pulp. She was terrified upon hearing that. She already won, and she's still planning to assassinate him? Xia continued his expert analysis. That's called weeding out the roots to prevent future trouble. Before he could finish his sentence, a cough echoed behind them. Well, they are totally dead now. Old man Nam Gong Hao had been standing there like a statue this whole time. The old man coughed and unleashed a lethal move. Since you guys are so free, why don't you go into the room to eavesdrop and see what they are discussing? But Ji waved his hands in refusal, flatly stating, Big sis is definitely tenderizing that guy like dough in the room right now. Hearing this, the old man's beard and hair stood up in rage. Good grief! Who infected a kid's mind with such vulgar words? The youngest, Jai, not only failed to save the situation, but also innocently blabbed the truth, making Zia frantically cover his brother's mouth, but it was too late. The old man finally realized who the culprit was. It turned out to be the one standing right in front of the two brothers. Now they could only haul ass and run, though a severe beating would be hard to escape. Nam Gong Hao hesitated. If he left now, Hong Jue would have to manage all by herself. Kunvu calmly advised him, jokingly saying that if the young lady flies into a raging fury, she wouldn't even give face to the family head himself. As for Nam Gong Tongvu, the moment he sat down, he showed an annoyed expression, grumbling and asking why Hong Sue had demanded a private meeting, even claiming he was very busy. Hong Jue remained silent, only quietly observing the changes on his face. In reality, right after the match ended, Mr. Mouse had scurried over to report. He warned Hong Sue that the young master wasn't a decent person, and it was best to keep her distance because right before the match, he had personally heard him yelling at his grandfather, rejecting the Nam Gong bloodline. Only at this moment did Hong Ju realize the reason why elder Nam Gong Voan looked so sorrowful. The flesh and blood grandson whom he cherished had heartlessly pushed him away. It seems this match wasn't simply about determining a winner and a loser. Looking at how frantically anxious the elder was, he truly treated him like a precious treasure. Yet Nam Gong Tongvu was living in bliss without even knowing it. Sitting in front of him, Hong Sue grew angrier the more she thought about it. Family bond is the most precious thing in the world, yet this idiot heartlessly trampled on it. Gentle advice seemed to be useless, so she had to resort to force. She suddenly recalled Brother Nam Gong Sia's teaching. Dealing with this kind of stupid person, a solid beating is the fastest way. Hong Sue had always been gentle and well-behaved, but for elder Nam Gong Voan's sake, she decided to make an exception to teach this guy a lesson he'd never forget. Just as she saw Nam Gong Tongvu intending to slip away, Hong Hui coldly barked an order. Her gentleness from earlier vanished, replaced by a terrifying pressure that paralyzed him. She coldly commanded, "Since you lost, sit your ass down quietly." Tongvu thought she was trying to threaten him, but to his surprise, the first words out of her mouth were a demand for him to quickly go apologize to his grandfather. He stared in shock. Losing on the arena was one thing, but now he was being lectured by his opponent about his own family matters. His arrogance flared up as he raised his voice. "On what grounds do I have to listen to you? What the hell do you even know about my family?" Hong Jue decisively replied, "You broke an elder's heart, so you have to fix it properly." The two bickered like cats and dogs, creating a massive racket. One complained about her minding other people's business, while the other insisted on playing the messenger of peace. The room was thick with the smell of gunpowder. Hong Shui looked at the stubborn rock in front of her and got furious. "I already made it clear that your grandfather is heartbroken, yet you still act like a brainless block of wood. Was it because he relied on being a biological grandson that he took his privilege for granted?" This ungratefulness pushed Hong Shui over the edge. She stood up abruptly and coldly declared, "While your family is still around, you must know how to cherish them." "Say no more." A resounding slap landed right on Tongvu's face. It hurt so much that he let out a roar. Ignoring his screaming, Hong Shui scolded him even harder, beating him to make him remember. "With this ungrateful and faithless habit, you don't even need the Namgong surname anymore. Earlier, the Grand Elder promised me a wish if I won. The thing I want is to ask him to kick your ass out of this house." Hearing these words, Namgong Tongvu was scared out of his wits. Though his mouth was tough, he feared this worst-case miserable ending. He stuttered in panic. "No, no." In reality, Hong Jie was just bluffing to intimidate him. She had already used up that wish, but bitter medicine cures the sickness. But this guy had to be scared into his senses. After that, her voice changed to a caring tone. "Whether you believe it or not, your grandfather's love for you is real. When someone sincerely cares for you, why push them away?" Finally, Hong Shui snapped with a closing line. "Either go apologize nicely right now or pack your bags and get the hell out of this house." Tong Bu finally gave in. While screaming crazily, he ran away, shouting, "Fine, I'll go!" Just as he was about to open the door, a shouting match echoed from outside. Elder Nam Gong Voan, out of sheer worry for his grandson, had led a crowd to rush over and pound on the door. The attendants were adding fuel to the fire. Hongzhou is extremely brutal. "What if the young master gets hurt?" Elder Voan wailed. "My eldest grandson is my life. I must see him right now." Standing behind the door, hearing every single word from his grandfather, Nam Gong Tong Vu froze completely. He used to think his grandfather would only scold and curse him, never expecting that his position in his grandfather's heart was that important. Seeing his grandfather's panicked and extremely worried state, this stubborn brat finally broke down. He burst through the door, threw himself into his grandfather's arms, and sobbed uncontrollably. "Grandpa, I'm sorry." This time it wasn't because he was afraid of Hong Sue's threats, but because he truly understood that this family bond was as heavy as Mount Tai. Seeing his grandson crying a river, Nam Gong Voan felt immense heartache. Thinking Hong Xue had bullied his grandson, he hurriedly hugged him tightly to comfort him. Nam Gong Tongvu finally repented. While crying, he admitted his faults, confessing that it was his own insecurity that made him vent all his frustration onto his grandfather. Standing nearby watching this scene, Hong Xue found it an eyesore, thinking to herself, "This guy flips his attitude faster than a pancake. Just now he hated his guts, and now he's a saint of apologies." But seeing the grandfather and grandson make up, she felt a strange bitterness in her heart. Clearly she was the winner, so why was she envious of this loser instead? Just when it seemed everything was settled, and Hong Xue could enjoy a few days of peace, who could have guessed that only a few days later, the tables would turn. Hong Xue sat dazed at the table, at Theo, facing elder Nam Gong Voan, who wore a stern expression. Her stomach was doing flips. "Is it my turn to be called out for a private interrogation now?" Nam Gong Voan furrowed his brows and spoke. "I really don't understand how my grandson could lose to a wet behind-the-ears brat like you." Hong Xue fearfully hung her head and apologized, fully expecting to be chewed out thoroughly. Who could have guessed Vo An would slam the table and bark, "You're the one who beat my grandson, so why do you bow your head so easily before others?" The vibe flipped entirely. Vo An's tone suddenly softened noticeably. He said, "I came here today not to nitpick, but to express my gratitude. If you hadn't stepped up, that arrogant brat would never know there's always a bigger fish." Back in the day, Nam Gong Voan was also just an outsider. To secure a place in the Nam Gong family, he had to work thousands of times harder than anyone else. Who could have guessed that his very effort to pave the way would turn into a toxic drug for his grandson, turning him into an arrogant punk who respects no one? Vo An actively brought up the past, saying his grandson was too disrespectful for daring to throw his shoe at Hong Xue. Hearing up to this point, Hong Xue finally understood. It turned out he came to apologize on his grandson's behalf to show his gratitude. Nam Gong Vo Ang decided to give Hong Xue a grand gift. The moment she heard about a gift, her eyes lit up. He pulled out an exquisite jade box, saying there were 2 treasures inside and she could choose one. The first option was the specially crafted dress. Judging by the luxury of the box, the item inside was definitely no ordinary stuff. She thought it would be some kind of national treasure, but who knew that upon opening it, what hit her eyes was a piece of clothing that couldn't be more ordinary. Though her mouth kept praising it, Hong Xue felt a brief wave of disappointment in her heart. Nam Gong Vo An saw through the young lady's mind, smiled, and said, "True, the first item is a bit mediocre, but the second one is absolutely your dream." He locked his eyes onto her. "Don't you want to legitimately enter the Nam Gong family's door?" This question was like an arrow hitting the bullseye. Hong Xue had long yearned for that, but she was just afraid of being called overly demanding, so she never dared to utter a single word. Nam Gong Vo An untied the knot in her heart, sharing that he himself had once gone through that same plight. Since it's called giving a gift, he might as well give the most practical option. Hong Xue held her breath, waiting for the answer. Vo An slowly spat out each word. "Marriage. As long as you marry my grandson, you will naturally become a member of the Nam Gong family." Hearing the word marriage, Hong Xue almost fell headfirst off her chair. She grimaced and frantically waved her hands. "Grandpa! Oh, Grandpa, I don't want to marry you!" This naive statement made Vo An so angry he almost foamed at the mouth. He glared and roared. "What absolute nonsense are you talking about? My house already has a mistress. If she hears this, she'll tear me to shreds." Vo An hurriedly corrected himself, saying his intention was to marry Hong Xue off to his grandson Tongvu as a granddaughter-in-law. Then Hong Xue would no longer be a helpless orphan, but a true flesh-and-blood member of the clan. These words touched the deepest desire of Hong Xue. She began to fantasize that if she really had a family, would there also be someone wholeheartedly protecting her like that? Vo An delivered one final critical strike. "As long as you nod your head, from now on I will be your real grandfather. Let's see who dares to touch a single hair of yours." This sweet promise was truly hard to refuse. Standing at a crossroads, on one side was the family status she had always dreamed of. On the other side was that plain dress. Hong Xue hesitated for a long time. Vo An also anxiously awaited her decision, but the result was completely unexpected. This young lady chose the dress. Vo-en was struck dumb. He slammed the table and roared, "Are you out of your mind? Missing the chance to become the young mistress just for a piece of rag?" Hong Sui was extremely resolute. She replied, "I'm starting to feel a passion for practicing martial arts. This path is inherently not easy. I want to rely on my own strength to stay at the Namgong house and focus on learning." More importantly, she still deeply remembered the promise from years ago. She had to completely cure her bizarre illness and then fully keep her promise to the Grand Elder, freely roaming across the vast world out there. Hearing the little lady talking endlessly about her ideals, Namgong Voang froze for a few seconds, then cracked a satisfied smile. It looks like the ambition of this young lady was much greater than he thought. He let out a sigh of regret. Missing out on this top-tier granddaughter-in-law was truly a waste. Before his lament could finish, the room door was suddenly slammed open. Nam Gong Hao aggressively rushed in, pointing straight at Vol's face and cursing loudly. "Good job, you old geezer, daring to take advantage of my absence to poach from my family." The two old men, nearly 200 years old combined, jumped to bicker with each other, right in front of a child. Nam Gong Hao was so angry his beard turned upside down, scolding Vo, and for being old but behaving badly, trying to trick a child into being his granddaughter-in-law. Vo-an was no pushover either, waving his hand and saying, "I got rejected anyway, just consider that I never said anything." After finishing his words, he shoved the jade box into Hong Sue's hands, saying this was a special gift for her. Before leaving, he even leaned close to her ear and whispered, "When there's no one around, remember to open the letter inside the box to read." The moment Nam Gong Vo-an vanished, Nam Gong Hao was still standing behind, grumbling and cursing, complaining about the old man walking slowly. Hong Sui tightly clutched the jade box to her chest, a wave of warmth welling up inside. In fact, there were words she was too shy to express. Even though she just rejected the marriage proposal, from the bottom of her heart, she already considered this place home. Nam Gong Hao stepped over to ask, "That old geezer didn't bully you, right?" Hong Hui shook her head frantically. "No, grandfather." Before the warm atmosphere could last, a voice suddenly echoed from outside the door. Hong Shui blurted out, calling him uncle. Then suddenly remembered the other party was the head manager of the Namgong mansion, Xu Wu. Xu Wu entered with a serious look on his face to report. The family head has been away for a long time and has returned to the mansion today. Nam Gong Hao was initially overjoyed, thinking to himself that this was a good sign, but Xiu Wu's next sentence poured a bucket of cold water over him. Young Master Nam Gong Dan has also returned with him. The moment the words were spoken, the temperature in the room dropped to below zero. Hong Sui sharp-wittedly noticed the unusually suffocating atmosphere, asking herself in her mind what on earth the background of this character named Nam Gong Dan was.